The tale kicks off in an unbelievably lavish palace where a crowd of silk-robed nobles packs in shoulder to shoulder. Then they erupt in claps and wild laughter as they stare, grinning at whatever's unfolding in front of them. Manga in the blue cloak dropped into a deep bow before the king on his throne, and the moment the ruler turned to Cahill, his 17th prince, he declared, "Today is your 15th birthday." The king declared that the guy had finally grown into adulthood, and to celebrate, he handed him his very own domain, then ordered him to step onto this earth and heal it himself. And with that, the young heel kicked off a rough, winding road ahead. Then after packing everything up, he stepped onto a boat and sailed straight for his brand new territory. I stared at it in pure disbelief, thinking somebody was messing with him. Then Hill's face went white with terror the second he saw it. The Sheol Reef. It takes 10 brutal days to row a boat to the capital, and the place is so dull there aren't even pirates. No merchants either, because this island is way too far out, just a giant chunk of rock floating in the sea. Suddenly, he spun toward the side and spotted a ship charging ahead at breakneck speed. So fast he stared in shock, wondering if they weren't even going to make sure he made it to the island alive and in one piece. Now it was on him, his duty to reach the 17th prince's domain in the kingdom of San Fallas. He kept swimming harder and harder, only to realize there wasn't even a beach in sight, and Heel had no clue where he was supposed to dock. Meanwhile, the sneaky 11th Prince Valpus grinned and blurted that this reef was *perfect* for Hill, while the 9th princess hid behind her fan and admitted that hearing about the senior reef sounded seriously interesting. He's got basically no real talent, yeah, it's straight up bad, but that's not even why everyone keeps laughing at him. It's all about the coat of arms. Every kid is born with a coat of arms, and his brothers are the kind that make you stare. The god of the sword, the king of the sword, and that means their packing power that's equal to what their crests say. Now they could finally measure themselves against the Heel coat of arms, and it's still this mysterious symbol nobody can crack to this day. It still made zero sense how hard Heel tried to train himself, because no matter what he did, he couldn't trigger his coat of arms, and his father and brothers lost it, furious that Heel's failure was bringing shame on the royal family. He awkwardly lifted his gaze and told his father, "With all due respect, I want to know if I can send my representative there to handle the reef." And the king's side snapped back that it was his task. With a sharp wave of his hand, the man proclaimed it was the oracle's word. Then you could almost say Hela was shoved out of the kingdom for good that very day. They got banished to some godforsaken mountain of stones, and he couldn't stop thinking, maybe they should have just executed him for treason against the kingdom, because right then, with the weight of it pressing in, he let out a breath and snapped back to reality. It was way too soon to believe he'd die. Suddenly, he spotted a spot where he could finally dock, so he throttled the boat down hard or he'd smash into the rocks, and then he let out a heavy sigh. He shot his hands up and wind magic ripped to life for sure. Tiny magic circles blazed inside his palms. He threw everything he had at it, but no special magic ever sparked. Only a tiny feather's drift tumbling down from a bird overhead. That's what made his magic real. When wind magic is supposed to whip up a brutal gust of wind, it just doesn't do it. He barely made it there, and he was already sure this was a great start. Then the guy snapped to action, hauling his things to a safer spot. He spotted the cave, dragged everything inside, and went deathly pale the moment he stepped in. Deep in that dark cave, he found piles of human bones and scattered remains on the floor, buried under rotting garbage and busted crates. He gulped hard, fear freezing his spine as cold sweat poured down his face, staring at the terrifying mess inside the cave. Then he spun around fast, convinced there was nothing else there so he could stash the supplies, and that's exactly what he did. Then he plopped onto a box and stared out from the cave, watching the waves calmly smash against the rocks, pure, breathtaking beauty. The birds were loud in the trees, and he thought, man, this is the perfect escape, quiet, peaceful, if only things were a little different. Suddenly, he slapped his own face, panicking that he'd somehow have to survive there no matter what. Then he snapped into action and decided he needed to figure something out first. When the ship sails by shows up, he'll grab help from them, because the ship he wants can't be from his own country, so it's either a foreign ship or a pirate vessel. And if he goes along with it, he's stuck becoming nothing but a servant. No trade ships ever came through there, and the reef sat too far from the capital for anyone to fish it. So Heel couldn't lean on his magic at all. he had to haul rainwater and pack the fish into barrels with only enough food and water to last him a month at best. He yanked open the drawer, convinced he needed to tidy up this cave, and already deciding to bury the remains of those people. The guy pulled out a tiny pickaxe and figured he'd try digging with it, right here and now. Right then, a notification blasted onto his screen. Someone delivered a mining tool. He snapped his head around, hunting for answers like, "What is this?" Hill gasped, convinced it was a voice inside his own skull, so he demanded the stranger say it again. The word hit his head. He'd been handed a mining tool. Then the voice demanded, "So, you wanna start mining?" He froze, certain he couldn't be wrong, and blurted, "Who are you?" The voice blurted that this was the king of the cave's coat of arms, and that it acted like an advisor. Then he insisted, loud and clear, "I'm not a living creature." The king of the cave wasn't a new power at all. It was the coat of arms Heel had been born with, but now that it finally showed up, the reason why crushed him with confusion. Suddenly it hit him. This was tied to the cave, and he blurted out, "Wait, I've lived in the royal palace my whole life. I've never even been close to that cave." Herb said he wasn't just an advisor. He sharpened mining skills and gave everyone support, and inside the cave he could level up in all kinds of ways. Gil snapped and startled, shouting at Herb to stop. He felt like nothing made sense. Then he couldn't stop imagining what would happen if he actually said he wanted to start mining. Right after that, Gerber nodded and announced he was about to crank up optimization in production. Then Hill blinked, totally lost, and asked what that even meant. The next instant, he stomped up to the wall, and a blinding glow flared to life, leaving Heel absolutely stunned. He demanded to know what it was, and why that wall was glowing like it was on fire. Herb told him the bright white spots were the prime locations for mining. Herb also promised the fossils would pop up easily with zero chance of the ground collapsing, so after thinking it over, he picked the exact spot to start. And then he drove the pickaxe down like lightning. At the exact same moment, something huge crashed out of the wall and Heel's jaw dropped because it only took one strike. Everything landed just like the advisor promised. Even inside that cave, it was blindingly bright, so he asked if this was one of those supporting effects. The advisor nodded and said it was a night vision effect. He rolled up his sleeves, insisted everything was fine, and now he had to clear some space for himself to crash and sleep. With a grin on his face, he swung his pickaxe at the cave walls and started smashing them to pieces, so fast it felt like pure fun. After a while, the whole cave wall finally splintered wide open, but he pushed on and carved himself a huge new passage in the rock. He grilled the advisor on whether the pile he could pull up in one go was getting bigger, then admitted he'd already unearthed a mountain of stones, while Herb reported that every time his mining skill rose, so did the amount he could dig up at once. Right after those words, he felt his powers getting stronger and stronger, then his foot slipped and he nearly faceplanted. The counselor immediately asked Hill if he wanted to extract 168 stones. He stared, stunned, and blurted, "What do I pull out?" The advisor shrugged and said it didn't matter how much he grabbed, the cave king's coat of arms could swallow them by the countless, endless stash. When the guy demanded to know where it all went, Gerb only shook his head and refused to say. So he'll push through and clear even more of the cave fast, because the vault doesn't mess with his body at all, and he can pull the excavated material out whenever he wants. He said he got it, then yanked out 168 stones from his construction inventory, completely baffled by it. Staring at all those stones, he choked out a breath of pure awe. Then the advisor asked if he wanted to trigger the automatic search, and he agreed on the spot. He figured that speed alone would soon get him to the backside, so he pushed harder, digging even deeper to make it happen. The advisor said the hill sat a full 10 meters from where he started, and the moment he heard meters, the guy froze, admitting he'd never even heard of that kind of measurement, like he probably should have known what a meter was. He popped up, wiping the sweat off his brow, and before Heel could even turn his head, his inventory was already packed to the brim with a whole stash of stuff. He dug up copper and bronze ore, then nearly dropped his tools when he spotted gold too, but he didn't need it on a desert island just yet. He admitted he had no clue what kind of magic it even was. Then, right on the spot, the advisor activated the mining guide. He read that this magic stone could skyrocket the user's magic power, and that the bigger the stone, the stronger the boost, so he couldn't help but wonder, Did it really work? He figured this meant his pathetic magic would finally get stronger. Then, out of nowhere, he spotted the turtle stone sitting in his inventory, and suddenly all those problems hit him at once. The manual claimed that using the turtle stone could buy it an extra day of life, and Heel's jaw dropped, pure awe on his face. That guy has zero clue who the Cave King even is, yet this coat of arms hits like a knockout and that shield rack turns into his prized possession fast. With a huge grin, he clamps his pickaxe in both hands. Then he sprinted back to the mines, yanking out resources like his life depended on it, completely forgetting the whole idea of finding ships that could have saved him as he kept digging and mining over and over. In the blink of an eye, he's plunging straight to 30 meters, and yeah, his inventory's stacked. What hooked him most wasn't just the loot. There were **90 magic stones and *6 turtle stones**. And the magic stones had him buzzing because he was already picturing himself casting even more advanced magic asterisk. The counselor leaned in and asked if he wanted to use a magic stone, and Hill nodded with total confidence, so he burned through every last magic stone he had. Right after that, Hill got shoved into an empty cave all by himself, spun around, stared at his own body and tried to feel the change kick in. After that, he awkwardly burst into a laugh and grilled the advisor about whether he'd already used magic stones. Then the coat of arms snapped the truth into place, and he couldn't stop wondering what magic stones actually do to the body once they're used. He tilted his head up, eager to prove his strength and to clear the mess he'd just dug. Then he lunged his arm out, reached for the win. Right then, a brutal rush of wind howled through the entire cave, blasting everything upward. Its power was straight up unreal. The raging wind tore through the area so hard it wiped out human remains and even smashed the stones there too, until everything got hurled up to the surface. He froze mid-breath, eyes locked straight ahead in pure shock, and he just couldn't accept what happened, so he stared on, stunned into silence. He blared in a loud scream, panicking, begging to know if he'd done it. And when Heel saw his magic skyrocket with those 90 stones, he couldn't wrap his head around it. Right then, the tiny creature started marching straight toward the guy. Heel spun around and then something leapt up fast, slamming into his face with full force. A tiny slime clung to his body and Heel just stood there, completely baffled, trying to figure out what the heck it was. He sharpened his pickaxe until it gleamed like death, then packed up everything he needed so he could dive into that cave and explore without a single hitch. And that's how 3 brutal days passed since the 17th prince of the kingdom of San Falas got shipped off, exiled to the rocky mountains called the Sheol Reefs. Once he was done, he slung his bag onto his back for real, checked that every tool was accounted for, and confirmed the food was already packed and ready to go. Then he flashed a huge grin and glanced down at someone, turning to Shell and telling her they were getting ready to kick off a brand new mining day. She just swayed there, staring at the footprints. Right after that, he'll drop from the shell and they'll set off together. This tiny slime's name was Shell, and he was Heel's very first buddy on this island. 3 days ago, the moment this guy stumbled on Shell, he blurted out in pure astonishment, "What the heck was it?" And that tiny slime just kept springing around him like it had no time to waste. He'll stare at him for a moment, calm down a notch and say he'd read about it. "It's slime," he insists. Then he'll ask, "Did you jump out because that wind guy's just scared you?" Right then, the advisor rushed in and told Heel, "We found the first tamed monster," and asked if he wanted to tame it. Heel froze, totally baffled, because taming is a special skill that makes monsters follow you. He's never even seen it used, because he doesn't work for hostile monsters, and in that guy's kingdom, every monster is just hated. Something else kept gnawing at him, so he clenched his fist, pressed it to his chest, and whispered that in a place this strange, nobody could ever call him out for sure. The advisor told him that to finish taming the monster, he had to speak its name. So he clenched his thoughts, blurted that the beast came from the Sheol Reef, and then started chanting the reef's name over and over. When he came up with it, he shouted, "We've named the monster Shell." The guy went, "I'm thrilled to finally meet you." Then the advisor declared the naming was done and the shell was fully tamed. It was clear the monster couldn't understand human words, but when another living creature stood by him, the dread in his chest eased a little. Then the guy flicked his hand and shouted that it was time to move on. That was exactly what the prince had been thinking from the start. He spun back, grinned at Shell, and called the monster to come to him. The monster steadied itself and forged a snug little platform high above the hill like it had plans. The prince just stared, baffled. Shell was shockingly brilliant. He sided with the monster and basically said, "Now I can reach that height." Then he thanked Slime. He'll fire off different gestures to tell the monster exactly what he wants. And that's how his mining business suddenly started moving way faster than it ever did before. In the last 3 days, he unearthed 3 times as much as before, burning through around 500 magic stones. Then his boosted magic kicked in and food stopped being a worry. When the day finally ended, the guy flopped onto the slime, stretched out on his side, and practically sighed. "This feels insanely good," guiding Shell with careful hands so she could sink in even more comfortably. While he kept digging, he hauled up 10 more slimes, 10. And honestly, he never expected they'd be so hard to talk to, so he figured his shell must be something special. He stared up at the sky and basically shrugged. Nothing mattered as long as they stayed out of his way. Then he decided, "I'm digging tomorrow." Shell kicked off the guy's day by yanking him awake and shoving his face down like, "Get up!" He finally sat up, greeted his friend, and asked why he was freaking out. Then Shell jabbed a finger at something off-screen. Right then, he spun around and choked on a gasp. Because someone was stranded on the shore, so he scrambled onto Shell and barreled forward, yelling to make sure those people were okay. When he finally arrived, horror hit him. These strangers were bleeding out and they were green-skinned goblins. He stared at the wrecked boat smashed on the rocks, then froze as one of them suddenly twitched and started moving because they weren't dead. Humans and goblins were officially enemies, so most folks think kill goblins the moment they see one, just like goblins do, and he suddenly turns around to chill. Heel wasn't about to play along. He told Slim everything was fine, swore he couldn't stand leaving those goblins to die, then shot them with recovery the second his hand went up. Once he finished all the key stuff, he grabbed the goblins' bodies and with Shell's help hauled them into the cave, tucked them under blankets, let them rest. And then he went quiet inside Heel's side because their lives were finally out of danger. He spun around and with Shell in his peripheral vision, snapped that the monster would clue him in the moment anything changed about these goblins. He couldn't shake the worry that he'd been too careless, because if they woke up and came for him, it would have been a nightmare, but now he could cast medium-level magic, so he pushed the fear down and prayed it would all turn out fine, even as anxiety clawed at his chest. He clutched his pickaxe like it was the only thing holding him together, swearing he'd just dig his way through, because that had to be what would calm him down, while he hacked at the rocks and cave walls harder and harder, swing after swing. He slammed the pickaxe into the stones again, grinning through the pain, then let out a heavy sigh like, "Mining is everything." Because for a moment it drowned out every other thought until he checked his inventory and felt amazing. He started hunting for fresh stones, and right there he spotted the Musogi stone and the shining stone. One banished curses, the other burned with constant glow, and since he had night vision he could study every detail even after dark. And there wasn't a single soul around who could curse him, so he let out a heavy sigh, telling himself it didn't matter. Still, it felt good to stumble onto new stuff. Heel was getting ready to head back to the company when Shell suddenly dropped down to him. He snapped his gaze to his pet, then stared up in shock and demanded to know if the goblin had woken up. Then he hopped onto the shell and together they climbed upstairs. Heel immediately snapped to it. The screams were right there. Someone was yelling at the princess to let him go, and she shot back at the general, yelling that he couldn't just grab someone else's food. Then the third goblin stepped in, fully backing her, insisting they should talk it out properly. The very next second, the biggest goblin of the 3 whipped around toward Hill and demanded to know who'd come lurking. The princess snapped at the general to drop his weapon because this man had saved them, but the goblin blurted that he couldn't, insisting the man was dangerous. In a panic, Heel noticed they were speaking the same language, and he figured they'd also come from the Bailey on that continent, yet something kept gnawing at him. He barked that the goblin needed to stop because the guy hadn't planned to do anything with them at all. Then the general snapped for Heel to back off since he couldn't trust that man an inch. He instantly realized they weren't hostile at all, they were terrified of him, and the general snapped that this guy was up to something, because otherwise he wouldn't be mocking them like that. The guy froze mid-breath, scrambling to decode what it meant. Then he spun around and saw Shell already pushing to her feet. He caught his own face in Slime's reflection, and once he saw it, he couldn't ignore how terrifying that guy looked. Panic hit Heel in waves. He feared the digging had turned him inhuman, so he blurted out an apology right away and insisted they could have his food. He made up his mind, wheeled toward the water and planned it all: zap the fish with lightning fast, then snatch it with the wind, grin as he lifted her up and tell her, "Let's eat the fish I caught." The general snapped in shock, asking why he didn't just slaughter them on the spot if his magic was that strong, then ordered him to finish the job fast. Right then, the little princess grabbed the general's attention and demanded to know why he moved so fast. But she never got the rest out. The moment the words stalled, she collapsed at the goblin's feet, gasping hard. Two goblins bolted straight for the princess and started shrieking at the top of their lungs, shaking her awake and begging her to snap back to consciousness, while Heel was completely baffled. He stared at the drooping goblins in total disbelief, then snapped, asking if the girl's wounds hadn't healed yet, when the old man paused and told him flat out that they hadn't. Goblin snapped the truth: our princess was trapped in a curse that would steal her life. Heel's blood ran cold the second he heard it. The old man crumpled in tears, apologized to the general and said the moment had finally arrived, and the general started sobbing too. They blurted out, "We can't leave the princess to die by herself, so we're going with her," and swore they'd take the punishment of the ancestors in another world. Hill stared in shock at the plan they'd made to destroy themselves. Then he blared, "Stop right now." The guy blurted that he could maybe pull the poison out of her body, so the general spun on him and snapped not to lie because they'd already tried everything, and the guy insisted he hadn't used it before but swore it was worth a shot. Right then, the guy yanked out one of the misogi stones and blasted it straight at the princess. She erupted in a brilliant glow, and the goblins were left staring in total shock. He mulled it over and told her straight up that her life expectancy got slashed too. Then he threw 79 total stones into the mix and clutched 10 more for himself, just in case. The general stared at the guy, stunned, and demanded, "What kind of light was that?" Heel quickly shot back, "The Musogi stone cured her curse straight up." Then the goblin locked eyes with the guy and barked, "Where did you even get that stone?" Right as tension hit the roof, a voice suddenly cut through the air. The general, the elder, and the old man stared at the girl in stunned disbelief as she hauled herself up and demanded, shaking, "What on earth just happened?" The princess blurted that she already figured she was dead, and at the exact same moment the room erupted with terrifying screams, then rushed apologies. The general dropped to his knees, slammed his head to the floor, and blurted out an apology for everything he'd done. Then he shouted that Heel should be named the savior of their princess. The goblin was totally lost, because it couldn't figure out how in the world it was supposed to apologize for its own act. Heel grinned, struck up a fire, and told the others to come over, sit down, and dig in, only to add that they hadn't even met yet. Then the wild part came when the guy stared in shock at how the general slammed his head into the floor. He thought goblins were terrifying. Then the general snapped that he still didn't know how to apologize so Hill would forgive him, and he finally revealed, "I'm General Elgable from the Blade Unit." The prince told everyone her name was Re, daughter of Rodin, the king of the blood and tribe, while the old man introduced himself as Valley, a shaman of the blood and tribe. Then Heel grinned and said, "Name's Heel, I'm the Prince of Sand Follies." The moment the general heard the guy was a prince, he blurted it out in shock. Suddenly everything made sense, like that's why he could sling so much magic, and the prince stammered, admitting it was all messed up, saying the stones were the reason he ended up here. Then he snapped that it wasn't a big deal, so he demanded, "Why are we here?" The moment the words hit, everyone went stone still, and the general slammed the truth down: their hometown had been burned to the ground by the orcs. Roughly, the entire royal ruling family got wiped out, and somehow only Princess Ree survived. For a whole year they begged for a place to stay, but the other clans shut them down, and the people, they chased them off without mercy. They and the other survivors are heading for a brand new world, but they can't even tell if the rest are alive or safe, and Vari keeps drilling the same worry into everyone, straight into that battered, falling apart ship. She spun back and snapped at the old man not to blame Al, saying that if they'd stayed on land they'd still have suffered the same fate. Then Vari turned to her, admitted she was right, and apologized. The girl whipped around to face Hill, smiling wide, and thanked him for saving monsters like them, right to the point, from the heart. The guy froze solid when he heard the way she talked about herself. Hill only shrugged it off, saying it was no big deal. Ri admitted she'd basically already accepted she wouldn't last long. Then, just like that, the crushing pain in her chest vanished and relief hit her so hard she could finally go peacefully. An owl just beamed at him, and then, like he'd already made up his mind, he agreed and said with total confidence that it's still way too early to quit now. He told me, yeah, there are still turtle stones here, and then he dropped the bomb. They're everywhere underground, and as long as those stones are around, they can keep the reefer's life going, no matter what. The general blinked in shock and demanded if it was even real. Then he leaned in and said that if he kept digging at that pace for a full week, he could pull out more than a year's worth of stones, and right then they all snapped glances at each other. The general admitted he knew he was asking for the world, but he still pushed for one thing: would Hill let them dig even deeper? The other guy looked stunned for a second, then nodded along without a fight. Alpuland Vari hit his knees the second he got it, thanking the guy from the bottom of his heart, and the princess just stared in confusion. Why was he handing them something this precious? He'll tell her not to worry, he digs only because he's into it, and then admits the truth. Being alone has him starving for company. Hearing that, Ray couldn't hold it in. She sobbed hard, tears burning. Then the princess bowed her head and thanked the guy from the bottom of her heart. He called it a small problem until he realized he had no clue what to do next, because sure, he had ice axes, but if he drove them into the wrong, weird spot, the whole thing could crumble and drop him. Suddenly, the advisor leaned in and said, "You can bless the monsters you tame, turning your effects into their power." Then he rattled off the perks: better mining, bigger experience gains, and digging that gets way more efficient. When they heard about the whole domestication idea, pure confusion hit them. Then he breaks it down: "You'll dig together with me." He even throws in this part, "And if you don't want to, you can refuse, I'm not forcing you." Then he rolls up his sleeves, starts digging himself, and hands them all the stones they need. Albico snapped that everything was wrong and he and Vemery would serve him, but he didn't want the princess dragged into it. Then, out of nowhere, Reed rushed forward and begged to serve the guy herself, and the goblins just stared in disbelief. The girl snapped that she couldn't just sit back and let everyone else do the work. She wanted to repay him somehow. She whipped around to him and demanded a new name, and he let out an awkward laugh like, "Don't stress." Even as the thought hit, if she really wanted it, she could always just stop. From that day on, Al's name became Alvavin, like a new fate slammed into place. The goblin swore he'd guard him from here on out. And she became Varys, promising she'd be honored to serve Hill for as long as her age would let her. Rio had a new name now, Rihanna, and he leaned in to ask the girl what she thought. Her face lit up as she grinned, promising that Rihanna would give him everything she had. After they finished eating, they slipped underground, because he thought this was just a quick detour to get back to mining. The guys went wide-eyed when that man pulled out a torch, like it was nothing. Then told them it was in his inventory and promised to teach them as they dug, since goblins couldn't see in the dark, so he whipped up a simple stone torch. Varys practically froze when he spotted the cave glowing in spots, and Rihanna lit up saying it was breathtaking. Then he cracked it. Those were the safe places to dig, and he'd show her everything before he snapped into action and swung the pickaxe fast. At the exact same time, a massive chunk of the mountain split wide open and came crashing down, swallowing everything in the inventory. Once it was all done, a nasty hole tore through the wall, goblins staring like they'd just seen magic. Hill blurted that he never kicks things off like this, but once they catch the rhythm, they can dig too. He even said the stones don't get collected on their own. Then he spun to Shell and asked if he could coach the other slimes, and told them they had to go for it because practice sharpens everything. They all nodded fast and dove right into action. And ever since that day, Cave has been bursting with life. A huge crowd packed into one spot, then everyone stomped their heels down as he crumpled to the ground in agony, while the aristocrats cackled, mocked him, and threatened him, because Heel wanted that weakling out of his way. Then he realized it was going to hit a whole crowd of people, and they just kept smiling as magic rained down to hurt the guy even worse. He froze in pure horror, wiped blood off his face, and the little creature cowered behind him. He gripped a tiny bottle of liquid so hard it looked like his hand might split, staring off like his thoughts swallowed him whole, until a voice finally kept calling his name for ages and he still didn't even clock it. Hill snapped his gaze up at Rihanna, who was calling his name, and the moment he made eye contact, she rushed in with a worried, "Are you okay?" Then Alvin chimed in too, wondering if Hill was wiped out since he'd already dug up so much today. The guy gripped the dependent with the bottle so tight his knuckles went pale, then snapped that everything was wrong and sank into deep, heavy thoughts. After that, he credited his king of the cave, bragging that he could dig all day long and never once feel tired. Rihanna stared at the guy, let out a heavy sigh, and told him he shouldn't push himself so hard. Then, just like that, he agreed and asked, eyes wide, what that mouth-watering scent was. Rihanna shoved an insanely mouth-watering apple pie right into view, and the girl promised they'd eat it today, while Hill, Alvin, and Varys let out deep, starstruck sighs. 3 days have passed since he first ran into those goblins, and since then the whole crew has already hauled themselves into a mini life. A real bathroom, a reservoir, and even a simple, comfy kitchen. He grabbed a tiny fork, took a bite of pie, and started chewing. Then his eyes went wide in shock so loud it scared the girl, because he'd been thinking this kitchen let him finally eat what Rihanna was cooking. The next moment, he's gripping the fork tight, cheeks turning a little pink as he blurts out that it tastes insanely delicious. Then Rihanna lets out a calm sigh, smiling like, "Good, I'm really glad you loved my cooking." Thanks to Rihanna, the things he brought didn't end up just cooked or baked, they transformed into mouthwatering food. Alvin lifted his fork, grinned, and said he never in a million years thought the prey would be this much fun. Varys nodded and they agreed. Then he declared it was all worth it because they were stretching the princess's life. Rihanna flashed a warm smile and called out Alvin, Varys, and Mr. Heel by name. And then she poured out her heartfelt gratitude for everything they'd done for her through that brutal, difficult time. As time kept rolling, things slowly started to look better. But don't get it twisted, the guy was still buried in a mountain of stuff he had to deal with. Heel was stuck with nothing. Once their firewood ran dry, all he had left was what he hauled from the kingdom, because this island had zero food and their clothes were slowly unraveling with every day. He'd keep digging, convinced none of this would happen, until the thought hit him. If a ship ever did show up, they'd finally trade emeralds for supplies. Then, out of nowhere, panic seized him and he snapped, "Everything's wrong." There was no way he could have predicted he'd end up with the very same worries as the real Lord of the Lands. Alvin hated the idea of dumping all the healing work on others, but the guy insisted they needed to rest. He kept smashing the stones, grinning like, "I just need to dig," because he was hunting more turtle stones for Rihanna and maybe striking gold with a few brand new ones too. Once he slammed into the rocks again, one of the walls suddenly crumbled and the guy jerked back with a shocked gasp, staring at the open space like it couldn't be real, then blurting, "Is this really a cave?" He spun around only to find the entire cave carpeted in strange rocks he'd never seen before. He gasped, then blurted, "What kind of stones are these?" Heel gawked at how orange they glowed like the sunset itself, and they felt nothing like those glittering stones. So he stepped closer, crunching on real earth on the floor, then demanded why she was there, until a sudden sound snapped his head up fast. Right in front of him loomed a massive monster like a giant spider, then it hissed, and he froze, trapped in a single breath. Heel's jaw dropped. Right in front of him was a massive spider, and he swore the guy was about to grab it and get swallowed by death like it was over for him. He shot his hand up to cast magic, but the monster bolted away at lightning speed, and that moment totally blew Heel's mind. He peered in and froze. Dozens of tiny spiders scuttled there. Then the guy yanked back, gasped, and apologized on the spot, realizing he'd stumbled into a spider's nest, and that everything inside was guarding its little ones. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. "New tame monster sighted." At the same time, Alvin was still warming up when he heard Hyla cut in, and he felt relieved. The guy had finally changed his mind about working. Then everything went still. Every one of them froze and stared at him. Hill froze in total disbelief. Then a giant spider loomed behind him, and the guys screamed at the top of their lungs that something was lurking behind the hill. He flashed a relieved smile and apologized for the scare, then said Tarin and her kids had just walked into the group. People around him sucked in breaths and shouted, "A cave spider!" And then it hit him. There was no way he could have expected a beast that big, one that felt like a battering ram. He'll ask if they're smaller on the continent. Varys just shrugs and says they're usually the same size as him. Their web is tougher than iron and their poison is vicious. They're deadly and they don't just hunt monsters, they feed on humans too. Hill's jaw drops the moment he hears it. Heel said he'd been warned long ago if there was any earth in that cave, stay on guard. Varys snapped back, this is spider territory and that means food waste down there. Heel went wide-eyed then gasped, I get it. He also pointed out that the cave floor where he'd found them was littered with it. Varys blinked in surprise, then realized that meant this was actually great news. Varys told her that the spider thing was way better for growing crops than the earth itself. Then Hill's eyes shot wide as she gasped, so that means you're built for farming. Varys paced over that rock-strewn island, dreaming up where crops could actually grow. Then he promised, I've got something to show you. Next thing you know, he ordered the guys to trail him as he led them straight to the tunnel. Inside, they stared at a long staircase that dropped down into the dark. Rihanna demanded where it came from, and he snapped back that he'd been testing the new tricks on his coat of arms. He'd climbed his second rank, so now he could shape things while mining. Walking this path was way easier for him than squeezing through that lumpy, uneven tunnel. Plus, he could finally manage his inventory, and even the trained monsters had night vision now. Alvin said it felt like tomorrow was about to pile on more trouble, and everyone shot back that they had tons to handle. Then he promised he'd ask the guys what they thought about the welcome party for Terran. Rihanna nodded and demanded fried fish, and just like that, the island change got the green light. Alvin and Varys hammered out new pickaxes, but the old man didn't know enough to recreate the originals. Hill said that even building tools is already a win, and then Rihanna spun spiders out of the web, crafting great towels and even a cozy futon too. Hill named Terran the head of agriculture, and just like that, she uncovered a shocking new talent no one saw coming. She digs like lightning, and he'll realize no matter how tough the Cave King is, he can't afford to underestimate her. Then everything goes sideways. A tiny sprout burst up on their territory, shot out into a blazing fast apple tree, and just like that, it was done in seconds. Heel never expected it to hit this hard. Those orange stones from the cave were sunstones, and they cranked living creatures' growth into overdrive, which is exactly why Varys figured that ram was so freakishly huge. Heel checked everywhere else and still couldn't spot them, so the stones should have been handled right away. Then the guy turned and asked Rihanna, are you busy? He handed the sunstones and the plantation plans to Rihanna, and she didn't even know if he truly meant it, so she blurted out, don't worry, I won't let you down. He fretted that she was stressing herself out, and that fear somehow made him trust her with his whole heart. He plunged underground and threw Shell a grateful nod for that lightning-fast descent. Everyone just did their part the way they always would, so he could lock in on mining with nothing but focus. He chased after turtle stones like they were gold, stacking up as many as he could. Then Rihanna dropped a bombshell. She already had 5 years of life, but she swore she was 15, and just like him, he trusted that she wanted a long, life-fueled future. He's the best earner, so he can't slack, he has to push even harder. Then, out of nowhere, he spots a strange white stone and snaps into action, digging it up first. Suddenly, he choked on a gasp, because that dragon sphere could bring the dead back to life, and he couldn't bring himself to believe it. Then he shot off to call Tarana and the others because he was going to dig with them fast. They couldn't spot a single other dragon realm, and he nodded like that made sense, because if they ever brought everyone back, it would be terrifying. He snatched the sphere, promised he'd take it outside, and warned that if he died, he'd never be able to pull it from his inventory. Right then, Alvin's voice cut through the chaos, and he demanded what the heck was going on upstairs. He left the stone on the ledge for a moment, then bolted up the stairs. Right then, a little stone started rolling down. Alvin blurted that their clan ship was right there, so he bolted out, eyes wide, and demanded if it was true. Then Alvin jabbed a finger and confirmed it. One ship lurched and rocked through the waves, cutting straight toward the guys. He looked around and realized everyone had survived. Rihanna started to sob, confessing she'd already feared they were dead. Alvin erupted with joy because his daughter was there too. He warned them docking here would be a death trap, so they needed to take their ship. Alvin bought it, then pressed the question, was the guy really sure? The reply hit hard, I don't use it. And just like that, he shoved a bag of jewelry into their hands. The guy told them to take it as a parting gift, Then they could restore the Bald Aang clan anywhere they wanted, and Alvin snapped at Hill, asking what the hell he meant. He snapped, "What's wrong?" Couldn't believe their friends were even on the ship, and then he demanded they ditch this remote place right now. Once they finally found a good spot for the house, he pitched the idea and pushed them to bargain, because getting stuff from the outside would be amazing. The goblins stared at one another, stunned, speechless, like they couldn't even believe what just happened. Alvin shot up and blurted out, yelling that Heel couldn't just walk away from them, because they weren't leaving either, and they hurried to the others so the guys would swear their loyalty to Hill too, promising they'd never abandon him. Rihanna nodded along and called them her helpless subordinates, making the guy freeze in shock, even as he thanked her because he knew there'd be no second chance. Rihanna leaned in and asked if Hill wanted to go with him, but Hill froze, like the idea was real, yet he still wasn't ready to leave the island. But when they clocked it, Rihanna said, "Then we're staying too," and Hill's eyes went wide while Varys and Alvin broke into grins. The guy tipped his hat and thanked them. Suddenly they shrieked as the ship went under, and most of the goblins, terrified and unable to swim, scrambled like mad for the boat to rescue them, but he could see they were already too late because that tiny lifeboat could only squeeze in 2 people. It was hopeless, there was nothing Healer could do, and when he remembered that island packed with bodies, he bolted forward without hesitation. He dove into the water in a flash, and the moment Alvin, Varys, and Rihanna saw it, panic ripped through them as they shouted Hilla's name. He lunged into the water fast, refusing to believe it was hopeless, because he knew he was the king of that cave. Right then, he'd burned through 9,000 magic stones, and he wasted no time blasting off a powerful spell. In the blink of an eye, the ice blasted forward, freezing the ships in place, and Varys, Alvin, and Rihanna couldn't believe what they were seeing. Hill couldn't stop grinning. 9,000 magic stones worth of power surged through him, and he jerked his arm toward Alvin, shouting, "Forget the boat. Just cross the ice and save them." He took it and charged ahead, then immediately slid right off her, stunned that the road he'd made was slick as ice, and just when it happened, someone else stepped forward. Taran stormed ahead with Heel balanced on her back, and the guy even said it was way easier to move it with her legs. Meanwhile, tiny spiders hauled goblins around, and Alvin realized he'd never treated spiders right before, because now he finally got it. At that moment, the slimes were right there too, so he'd yell to Shell to coordinate with the rest and strike together. Everyone threw everything they had into saving an entire goblin ship. Heel unleashed magic while the others dragged the goblins out of the water, one by one. Once the battle ended and everyone finally hit land, he unleashed magic to stitch up the monster's wounds. Rietta told Hill that because of him, all 205 passengers on the ship made it out safe, and Varys snapped back asking how they could pay. Then he added he was just relieved everything turned out okay. Alvin clung to little Fu with pure joy she was alive, and when the girl said it felt awkward, she tugged at her father and begged him to stop. Varys leaned in and said, "Fu is the general's daughter." Then he laughed, pointing out, "Alvin looks crazy happy." And finally he added, "And trust me, she looks way more like her mother." Rihanna said Heel's healing magic made every wounded person feel better, thanked the guy, and he just nodded along like, "Yep, that's how it works." He said he never could have pulled it off alone. Taran and spiders, Shell and slime, and then Rihanna, Elvin, and Varys, all of them racing in to save the Baldan tribe. He shot them a grateful smile, because somehow he'd managed to save them just in time. The guys were moved, and Varys even praised him as too kind. Then out of nowhere, he demanded to know who was really behind it all. He spun around and froze. There stood a middle-aged man he'd never seen before, and the guy demanded to know if the ship was carrying him. Vera shot back that no one had filed any report like that, and she couldn't help wondering whether Heel had run into trouble in that cave. He'd never seen the man before, and he couldn't figure out why he was standing there with no clothes, so he'd blurt out his name in pure disbelief, then demand who the stranger was, but the guy just spun away and walked off. He marched up to everyone and dug in, so Rihanna figured he must have been starving and cooked up more. Hill thanked her, and when everyone started asking who he was, he paused, thought for a beat, and said they should just put it on. The very next day, they clocked back in. Hill grinned and said, "This is totally gonna be enough, trust me. We can finally bring everything in." In a blink, it all transformed into a dining room. 205 new people flooded in, and Heel had the place ready with brand new rooms. He tamed everyone in the Baldan tribe. Sure, the situation wasn't ideal, but the moment the island turned lively again, real joy lit up his heart. Good news still came, but at the shipwreck site they only spotted a few supplies, so now everyone's slammed, rushing to crank out necessities and the tools they need. Rihanna rolled in with a drink for Hyla, told him he nailed those rooms, and he thanked her, then asked if the girl was all right. She just shrugged and said, "Yeah, it's like that," before the girl admitted she knows this twist is wild but insisted that Hilo should give it a try. He'll gulp the drink, grin, and realize it tastes like grapes. Rihanna tells him she used a sunstone on a grape seed she spotted in the boat, and the guy practically lights up and calls it amazing. He never imagined he'd be sipping fresh juice there. Rihanna said it was just a tiny plantation right now, but give it a few years and it would be bursting with fruit. The moment he hears that, he bursts into praise because she's already thinking about what comes next, and he tells her he's certain she can handle it. He'll also say that if she needs help, she can always come to him, and the girl swears she'll do everything she can right as the goblin rips into the air, shouting at the man, "What do you want?" They said all he does is stare, so that goblin told Mappa to go bother someone else. Mappa will spot the naked old man on the map, and Rihanna nods like, "Yeah, everyone calls him that." Then Mappa stares at the tools, spreads his arms wide, and goes for it. Goblin shoved the hammer into Mappa's hands and dared him. If it wasn't good enough for a man, then try swinging it himself. So Mappa snatched the hammer and his eyes instantly blazed. All the guys crowded in, eyes locked as they watched the map come alive. Hill studied the man and clocked how naturally he handled it, while Maps swung his equipment like he owned the whole scene. Then he started hammering the pickaxe in wild, lightning-fast swings, so fast everyone nearby gasped and stared, and right after, he plunged it into the water and shot the blade into a razor-sharp edge. That pickaxe slid out like pure elegance, so beautiful it looked like true artwork, even though it's really just a plain old tool. He snatched a fresh pickaxe, strode ahead, and wondered if it could smash the stone. Then he whipped around and ordered everyone to look, a normal pickaxe in his right hand and a map in his left. Right then, he slammed the two picks into the stone at once, and the second he did, every trace of doubt vanished, because the map pickaxe carved a crater way bigger than any ordinary pickaxe could ever make. Heel said it's just ordinary iron, so he can't wrap his head around how Map pulled this off. Then the guy only shot back a thumbs up, and right then, Heel finally spotted something weird. He strode up to a towering stone and declared dead sure that his item was still there. Then Rihanna spun around, stunned and confused, and demanded what on earth just happened, while the guy kept pressing, asking if they'd spotted a round stone nearby. With all that chaos screaming around him, he totally forgot about it. Then the guy froze, gasped at what he saw. A human-shaped pit carved into the stone, and his mind instantly screamed, could this really be true? He didn't even see it buried in the rock's shadow, but it looks like those rocks were there for a reason. That'll be the moment he finally realizes the Dragon Ball has brought the map back to life. Then he let out a tired sigh, almost relieved to think they've gained another loyal comrade. With Map's tools on their side, the crew expanded the shore, tore the ship apart, and rebuilt it from the ground up. And yep, it's already paid off in a bunch of cases. They ramped up the digging big time, then stumbled on brand new slimes and actually tamed them, and now those slimes are helping carry everything around. Heel wanted to pretend everything was fine, but the truth hit hard. Turtle stones kept vanishing one by one. Rihanna just smiled and said she already had more than enough. They boosted the princess's life by a mere 10 years, and Heel was still 100% sure the girl truly wanted to live. Suddenly, he lets out this heavy sigh and tells Shell it's not true at all, because it was that guy who wanted Rihanna to live longer. He craved to dig deeper, build the island up, and stay close to Rihanna. Then, out of nowhere, he punched through a cave wall and the color drained from his face instantly. He stormed inside and spotted a room downstairs, and it hit him. This wasn't just some lonely desert island. Something big had happened here long ago, so he grabbed everything he could. There, he stumbled on a stone heart that could power an artificial organism. So he finally had a shot at forging a doll, and his mind immediately raced to the question, could he even build a brand new comrade? The advisor only nodded and said you could mix the right materials to make it happen. He grabbed the stone and told himself he'd figure out what to do later. Then he stumbled on the golden evolution stone, one that let a monster evolve, and he had zero idea what that power actually meant. The advisor told him he could change the monster's looks, same age, same personality, but its body would shift. Heel nearly freaked out at how scary that sounded until a wild idea struck him. That night he linked up with the guys and Various grilled him, does the stone let monsters evolve? Then he hit a follow-up, had the old man ever heard of something like that? Everyone nodded and swore, every goblin knows it, our legends spell it out, and Alvin couldn't stop thinking about it after they brought it up. Vera stared at Heel and blurted out, asking if the guy had ever heard of species that looked just like goblins. Then the guy paused, thinking hard, and asked if Varys meant hobgoblins or leaf goblins. Everyone shook their heads and swore they were just ordinary goblins. But push for more power and you get twisted into a hobgoblin, crave a life deep in the wild woods and you turn into a forest goblin, all because of that one magic stone. That's when it hit. He finally understood what evolution really meant. The guy stared at Alvin and blurted out, "Are you a hobgoblin?" The man shot it down fast, saying, "Nope, I've never used this stone, I'm just born with this body." Varys admitted he once thought he was nothing but a legend, and now he can't believe the truth. He's real, and the king of the cave says this power lets the monster steal a brand new body and live even longer. The guys froze in shock as he stared at them and demanded, "So, you wanna test it on the princess?" Varys was intrigued, but he couldn't stomach messing with his own perfect body. Alvin claimed it was too good to swap out, and the princess insisted she'd help heal any way she could, even with magic. Vera swallowed the risk and admitted she couldn't spare anything valuable. Still, she pushed the plan anyway. Goblins can't use magic, but if it evolves, maybe it'll all click into place. He told her, "If you can use magic, it'll help me a ton, but the truth is, I just want you to live a long, long time." The girl mulled it over for a second, then blurted out she wanted to evolve, while he grinned and swore everything was already settled. Rihanna grabbed the egg in her hands and the thought hit her hard that she wanted Mr. Hill in her life for a long, long time. Then everything was revealed and the guys were absolutely blown away. That light blasted so bright he had to brace himself. Then when it finally cut out, he opened his eyes and everyone watching went silent in shock. One guy even blurted, "So, is that Rihanna?" A girl with silky, super long hair and sharp elf ears slowly blinked awake, hugging her hands to her chest like she was bracing for something. She stared at her own reflection, then snapped her head toward Hill and demanded to know what happened to her right as Maps spotted her and her nose started gushing blood, leaving the guys staring in pure shock. He opened his eyes, muttered something, and then, when he finally managed to fall asleep, he couldn't believe it. But the second it hit him, he jolted awake, gasped, and blurted that Rihanna was the one who mattered most. The girl with black hair stared at him, grinning as she said, "Yep, just like that," while Rihanna was right there. Heel shot his eyes open and froze. There he was, sprawled in this girl's lap, and fear hit him like a punch. Rihanna beamed warmly and Heel's face flushed so hard he practically screamed. He shot away from her and demanded if it really was Rihanna, but the girl panicked and said he needed to lie down, because he'd collapsed out of nowhere. He turned red with embarrassment as memories hit him, and when Hill pushed to help Map, he made himself bleed. He let out a panic scream, swearing he was only a little tired, seriously, that was all it was, and then demanded how long he'd been out cold and begged for the Map's condition. The girl told him it was still night and the map was tucked away in another corner of the room. Hill blushed again, then said, "I saw it." He's gonna ask if Rihanna was okay because he swore nobody saw that she'd end up looking like a real human, and the girl just droops in front of him, admitting she hates what she used to look like. As a kid, she got cursed, sick to the bone, and her growth froze dead in its tracks. Her stunning sisters mocked her, her parents tried to save her at first, then turned around and started pushing her away too. So when she cracked open the evolution stone, it left zero room for doubt she was going to look stunning. She shot Hill a guilty apology for grabbing that precious stone just to satisfy her selfish craving, and the guy just sat there thinking hard. And he admitted, barely finding the words, that ever since he landed on this island, he feels like something inside him has changed. So it's awesome if Rihanna feels like she's getting a fresh start too. Then he even asked if it'd be a total waste for her to evolve without getting the exact body she wanted, and she sincerely thanked him right after. She grabbed his hand and swore that her body, her life, and even her name were all gifts from Heel, and now she was ready to lay every single thing she had at his feet. He blushed hard, then grabbed her hands right as his face turned even redder because the map had woken up and was staring at them. And yeah, the Baldan tribe was blown away too when Rihanna's evolution hit. The girl stepped out in a dress so gorgeous it basically stole the air. She claimed it was woven from tarantula and other spider silk. Rihanna glanced at the group and shot them a question. What did they think? Hill's cheeks flared as he stared at Rihanna, while Alvin and Vera watched her evolution unfold in real time. Yet so many people still couldn't wrap their heads around how it happened so fast. But the moment they saw how fiercely she was grinding, it hit them like a lightning bolt. This was really their Rihanna, and she'd thrown herself headfirst into martial arts and magic like her life depended on it. It even looked like Heel was quietly fueling Rihanna's unstoppable dreams. He watched her work with a warm smile, then Varys caught him at it and Goblin fired off a question. Did Heel have any plan in mind? Hyle got totally flustered and blurted to Varys that he wasn't staring at Rihanna's feet or anything, and Goblin just chuckled that everything fit Hyle perfectly. Because this coat of arms is the Princess S with the Farmer Mark II, and Hyle nearly fell out of his skin when he heard that. That farmer's harvest suddenly explodes with abundance, and trusting the princess with the plantation turns out to be the smartest move anyone could have made. Heel blurted, stunned, "So you've got coats of arms too?" Varys nodded and shot back, "Isn't that odd?" Heel stumbled through an apology and admitted, "In my kingdom we swear only people have coats of arms." Varys smiled and confessed, "Yeah, I've got one too." He held up his hand and asked in total shock if this was really the king of witchcraft, and Varys stayed calm and nodded. Then he leaned in, admiring that it was an unbelievable coat of arms, and said only one of his brothers had ever worn it. Varys nodded along, then snapped that it was pointless for a goblin like him. Magic was out of the question. He said all of this was exactly why he could keep digging into his research without getting stuck drowning in the power of the coat of arms. He was about to pitch an idea, but Varys snapped back fast, saying this talk would go nowhere, and then pushed him to talk about the plan he'd mentioned the day before. Varys is plotting to wrestle land back from the sea to grow the island. Bigger space means more crops, and they're also carving out a whole new playground so the kids can run wild. Varys called Heel over and said, "Hand me the raw materials and I'll make something happen." Then he pushed to test his idea right away so Heel could pass it to him. He mapped out the whole plan so everything's fine and told Heel he could use the workshop outside the cave. Heel slammed his workshop to life and started grinding the rock, mixing stone and sand until it became gravel. Then he shot his hand out fast to drop each block right into its plant location. Everyone stared in disbelief. Then the guys had to blast the seawater away with water magic. They stuffed the empty space with stone and gravel, then smoothed it over with spider mud, and Heel grinned like everything was fine, though deep down he didn't know if it would hold. When he ran out of space, he cracked the stone and built a spot that looked just like a public square, and the guys went absolutely wild. When they sprinted to the ready area, Heel's worry snapped into the air. It's still dangerous, but he figured it was fine if they just booked it, and the children beamed with wide smiles as they started thanking Heel. He beamed and told them he was always ready to help. Rena marched right up, thanked Hyla for everything too, and said she just knew they'd raise an amazing crop. Then he grinned, already excited for what came next. Just when the guys thought everything was finally good, a giant bird burst into the open sky and snatched the map right out of a runner's hands with its beak. Highland Rihanna went completely white with horror. The monster snapped forward and greedily gulped Map's body into its mouth in seconds, while the goblins stared in terror and pointed right at the bird. They gasped in terror and stared up at the sky. Hundreds of vicious killer birds stormed down, flying straight into the open ground. He yanked his hand up and barked for everyone to rush back into the cave right now. Rihanna shoved the children in with Varys, and at that exact moment one of the tiny goblins stumbled, thud, and Fauch clocked it instantly. The girl bolted up to her friend, snapped at him, then hauled him to his feet as fast as she could right when Rihanna's eyes caught it and she screamed, shouting Hela. Meanwhile, one of the birds came barreling straight for the kids at full speed. Foulest panicked, but she clutched the boy tight, refusing to let him get hurt. Then the second the bird was a meter from the kids, it snapped, its head flew off and the monster was gone. He'll stare that way in pure disbelief as the monster's blood splattered everywhere, and right then the weapon that finished it rockets backward, moving fast until someone clamps down on it tight. Alvin gripped his weapon so tight his knuckles ached, throwing his body in front of the children, and when the girl finally blinked through the fear, she stared at him, then shouted her father's name. Alvin grinned like a villain, snapped his daughter's way, and called her a fool, then, with her new name on his tongue, ordered her to get away from this place as fast as she could. And the moment she was gone, his rage kicked into overdrive for the fight. Once every kid was locked inside the cave, Alvin spun his axes like a storm-clearing monster after monster without mercy, and Hill couldn't believe what he was seeing, or shake the fear of how terrifyingly strong that Baldan tribe general really was. He jerked himself up and threw a cover over Alvin's back, then he praised the general like a hero and promised he'd help him right now too. Alvin erupted and screamed for the boss to back him up as he spun around, but before he could react, someone swung in with a shield. Rihanna stood behind the guys and snapped the shield up so fast it saved everyone from the monster's back attack, and the general's jaw dropped watching the princess tear into battle. The girl shot back that she could cover for them too, so he had no choice but to do what needed to be done. The guy felt confused for a second, then snapped back to reality and agreed, thanking Rihanna like it mattered. The three of them surged into battle, taking the monsters out one after another. Because they had no idea which one had swallowed the map, so they went straight for the heads, praying they wouldn't accidentally hurt the man. They all snapped to it and accepted the order. Once everyone was safe, Varys barked again, screaming for everyone to dive into the shelter, then grabbed the three guys and shoved them to hustle back inside too. Alvan stepped up, then leaned in and told them, "I'll cover the back, Hylu." Rihanna hold the cave entrance. Heel remembered the Heart of Stone, then snapped, saying everything was wrong and he already knew who could guard that cave best. He hurled a stone forward and burned through 300 production stones in one go. Right when the birds came barreling toward the cave at full speed, a giant hand swatted them aside like they were nothing. Because that oversized Gallum doll was built for this, and the moment the monster showed up, he snapped that Gallum would guard the cave better than anyone. Right then, the bird that was behind the heel started hacking and gagging, fighting to spit something out. After several grueling tries, the monster finally spat out a map that landed smack on one of the slimes. Panic flared across Hill's face, but he instantly understood they were safe from accidentally crashing the map now. He fired off a call to Alvin right away and demanded he bring all the birds together. The goblin looked totally lost for a split second, then it clicked, and he hurled his weapon into the air, shouting that he'd hand it over to him. With quick, dexterous hands, he spun the rope around his weapon and snagged the birds mid-flutter, sending them spiraling in confusion until they finally slammed together into one massive living ball. Alvin grinned like he already won, then bragged that these ropes were spun from spider silk, so they wouldn't snap not even if someone begged them to, and once it was done, he'd yell for everyone to drop to the ground. Alvin and Rihanna crashed to the ground, and the goblin sprawled over the girl to shield her, while Heel thrust both hands up and summoned a brutal blizzard. Right then, savage gusts of wind slammed huge chunks of snow into the birds, battering them until they were badly hurt. Rihanna and Alvin stared, totally stunned. The birds panicked, didn't know what to do, then shot upward and fled fast. At the same time, the kid on the side flashed a smile and said, "We're flying away from here." When the goblins saw it, they burst into happy cheers. Alvin sprinted up to Hill and said it worked perfectly, while Rihanna rushed to the guy asking if he was hurt. Then, out of nowhere, the girl suddenly crumpled to the ground. She was shocked too. Hill was totally baffled, so he rushed over to re-announce it and lend a hand. The girl apologized, all awkward nerves, admitting she was genuinely terrified, but once Hill was there, she was okay. When he heard that, his face flushed fast, his legs trembling too. He blurted out that this was the first time he'd ever fought monsters for real. They all laughed, and Varys shouted that he was just so relieved they were all okay. Hyle and Rihanna clasped hands. Then boom, every goblin and the map swarmed around them, cheering like they'd just won everything. Heel grinned, thinking that maybe even someone like him could rise into a real ruler. The guy asked Rihanna if she'd be cool with eating a killer bird. She said yes, and laughed that it was delicious, and now he's decided that tonight's dinner is going to be a crispy, fried feast. Before anyone could blink, the tiny goblins tore the bird apart, ripped out the feathers, then cooked the meat right away, turning their savage kill into delicious meals. Alvin grabbed Hill by the shoulder and said, "Hey, I just want to thank our boss," and the guy immediately blushed, feeling way too exposed by all that attention. At night, the guys huddled around a crackling campfire while Rihanna sizzled up fried meat, and the second they started eating, pure happiness lit up all their faces. They stared at a jam-packed table piled with meat in every form imaginable. Then, after they fought off the killer birds that night, they ended up with a banquet nobody had ever seen before. Rihanna swung around to Hill with a bright grin and told him he'd better start eating too. Then Hill nodded, a little stiff, staring at the meat clutched in his hands like it might bite back. The guy stared at the meat like it was a mystery, convinced he'd never tasted monster meat, yet that insane color and smell blew his mind. Heel took a tiny, super careful bite, then started chewing the meat, and the second it hit, he snapped into a sharp gasp of admiration, like all his doubts were instantly gone. Rietta let out a happy laugh, stunned that Hill seemed to love every single thing on the table, and the girl even added that they had soup too. Hill grinned and said it was just amazing, while Heel kept praising every dish like it was the best meal ever. Suddenly, he spotted something in the soup, shot a glance at Rihanna, and demanded to know if it was really the same meat, while she gasped, caught off guard and not even thinking to check. Rihanna explained that this killer bird changes its flavor depending on what you bite. Wings and legs hit like chicken, the belly tastes like beef, and the shoulder goes down like pork, like it's packing 3 animals in one deadly meal. Heel clocked it right away and warned, "If you strike them again, it'll be deadly dangerous," then quickly added, "But hey, these monsters could also be a great food source." The guy insisted that the golem must stand guard at all times. Varys edged closer, grinning, and told him it was a genius plan. Those killer birds won't dare strike anyone bigger than they are, and the old man would stare at him in shocked disbelief. Varys promised he'd whip up a guard unit, then rally the troops to build walls and watchtowers because they'd keep the fields safe from the bite of salt damage too. He nodded and told them the stone's processing was on him, then leaned in and asked Varys to draft the layout, until he suddenly caught sight of a little girl who'd been sitting right beside them the whole time. Fall slid next to them and stared at the guys while munching a meaty bone, and Heel was totally lost when the girl started circling her gaze around him from every angle. He was sure she had to be Alvin's daughter. The girl stalked up to Hill, radiating pure displeasure, then snapped that her name was Full, reminding him it was he who had given it to her in the first place. He looked totally lost, stepped back, then blurted an apology and asked if she really needed anything. After a quick beat, she stared him down and demanded to know why he was so insanely strong. He stared at her in total shock, then blurted, "Wait, are you talking about magic?" He insisted it all came down to extracting ore. He dug up special stones packed with magical power, and with every rock he unearthed he grew stronger. He stared around in full awe, wondering if magic stones hid right here. Then the girl asked, "Can I dig for them too?" Rihanna awkwardly blurted out that if goblins want to use magic, they've got to evolve their bodies first, by leaning on the stone of evolution. Full proudly said she was about to evolve, and he stared back in pure disbelief like, "Is it really that simple?" Then he added, "And there's one problem, we don't have an evolution stone." Alvin stormed up and smacked the girl on the head, growling that it was time she stopped messing with their boss. Alvin also told Full not to say that, then he gently lowered his daughter's head and said she'd always been hungry to get stronger. Full smiled and muttered that with a father like him, nothing could really stop that kind of strength. Avon blurted, stunned and asking, "Is this really happening?" But Full just wouldn't answer, so the guy warned that if the girl wants the stone of evolution, she has to dig for it, and if she finds it, she gets to use it. Avon then demanded, "So you're sure?" Right after that, she spun back with bright joy and shouted that she could mine ore like a pro. Then she promised Mr. Hill she'd help. Elvin looked stunned and asked the guy if he was really sure about that choice. He smiled and insisted that the more people who could use magic, the better, and he was absolutely certain. Then he snapped his gaze to Rihanna, checked the exact count of magic stones right then, and without hesitation, he slammed 500 stones into her hands. The girl stared at him, stunned. "I'm not messing with you," he said. "I tried using magic stones on you to boost your power." Her eyes widened as she choked out, "So, you're saying I'm—" The girl shot back that she understood and that she'd do anything to become a better person. Alvin nodded and said it was the right move because they needed to build real strength. Then he urged them to start eating right. The guys instantly agreed. Today, they finished the land reclamation and tore into the most delicious meat. Then they threw a full-on Thanksgiving party, and this day lit up as the very first unforgettable moment on Sheol Reef. Out of nowhere, he'll sneeze so loud it'll shake the room. Then the guys will reveal they built a fridge to cram in a mountain of food, and it's all Ryana's idea. They'll look back and one guy will say he's heading out, and with the cold biting through her, the girl will shiver and push, "Let's go outside." No one had to worry about the meat going bad. Ryana nodded hard and said that on the continent, they kept food tucked away for over 6 months by freezing it inside caves. Mora needed a giant steel door, but this guy wasn't done. He was grumbling about the amenities too. Hill leaned in and asked if he wanted the stone shaped that way, then said the map looked great. The forge got an upgrade too. Rihanna's been getting way more confident lately, and the girl swore she'd keep casting freezing on a schedule so the ice wouldn't ever melt. Thanks to Alvin and Varys, their outer defense was holding strong, so now Heel could finally rip back into mining. And she blurted, shaking her head in disbelief, that she'd expected the worst. Yet somehow nothing bad happened in that stretch, and he'll agree with the girl. She swore the Cave King is incredible, and yeah, she knows how the light boosts their output and keeps blockages from forming, but admitting she knows nothing about mines is reckless, and that guy nodded right along. Then she said they need ventilation because dust can wreck your lungs, and she even asked whether Hill was out there mining coal. She warned if the gas piles up, they'll get poisoned or worst case, it'll explode. The guy snapped, shocked, and then they pointed out the air supply unit sits outside, so they've got to go ask Map to build it. He said it'll be a huge help, because Fuddle knows a ton about mines, and the girl nodded, telling him she's been at her work since childhood. Then she proudly showed her coat of arms. "That's the miner's coat of arms. Yeah, she can dig too, but nothing compares to the Hill Cave King. Even so, Full could dig," and Hill told her, "It's encouraging. If you spot anything, you tell me." The girl nodded and agreed. Full is insanely experienced. Sure, she might lag a bit in raw quantity and speed, but the way she mines is pure efficiency, and her ore intuition is mind-blowing. Honestly, he can't shake the feeling that she's his biggest rival since Terran. Suddenly the girl blurted, "So, did you have a father?" And the guy just nodded, cool and quiet. "Yeah, I did." She smiled, certain he must have been a great man, and then Heel went silent. Hill was terrified of his father and brothers, because sure, he'd gained mind-blowing magical powers, but this family runs on limitless power that makes his look tiny. He'll ask if Phil wants to get stronger than his own father, and the girl shrugs it off, says she doesn't care, then dives right back into her work. Then he'll grin like, that was easy to read. Suddenly he spotted it and demanded to know if it was really a cursed cave. Full said, "Yeah, I did it, and there's something inside," and the cave stretched huge beyond belief. Full shot a question, "Is the evolution stone in the same room?" And the guy nodded, saying yep. The moment he stepped in, strain slammed into him from the statues, then one of them snapped its eyes wide and sparked to life. He scrambled to cut off the foul air as the statue lunged and attacked. He'll snap his shield up to deflect the strike, then he blurts out, "Is Full okay?" And the girl nods hard, "Yes, she's fine. They're golems, sure, but the one he's building can't use magic." The golems charged the guys and he realized, yeah, they even had swords. Then they closed in from all sides and he folded his arms like he was ready for whatever came next. He snapped his power and a brutal storm detonated on impact, wiping the monsters out in an instant. He Elastith foe was hurt. The girl snapped that she was fine, then apologized for charging ahead without thinking. The guy sighed and said it was the kind of chaos that ruins your plans, especially the moment the golems showed up. He told Shell to blast the word because they needed to suspend the mining. Then out of nowhere, Full spotted a golden stone, snatched it and demanded answers, only to learn it was royal and totally useless to her, and that betrayal lit her up with anger. Suddenly, a map slid out, snatching the girl's breath and spooking her. He couldn't stop wondering what that man was about to do next. Full didn't know either, but his face lit up like something great was coming. Then the map quickly grabbed the sword and vanished out the door. Mappa fired back asking how long Full planned to keep marching around like this, then she snapped, "Do all people act like that?" Full shook his head and said, "Not many," because he'd never seen maps this fired up before. He wondered if this sword had something weird about it. He went to grab it, but it wouldn't budge. Then they both yanked at it and still nothing moved because they just wanted to haul him away. The advisor warned him the Cave King could only spit out minerals and mined items, but when the guy got the processed stash, it looked ridiculously good. He swung a pickaxe at it anyway and it wouldn't budge, and even Full was shocked when healing couldn't break that thing. He snapped, "I'm not finished," and slammed again. Then the sword and the pickaxe shattered in one brutal burst. He pulled it off, but even the mighty MAPS couldn't handle that, and now he's going to inspect what the sword was forged from. Orichalcum legendary stuff hung in the air, lighter than metal, tougher too, and it could even weave magic into the world. The guy stared at it, baffled, because if it weighed less than metal, why couldn't he lift it? Then it hit him hard and he went stone still, realization snapping his breath away. At that moment, Alvin was locked in, muscles coiled tight as he poured every ounce of strength into lifting his sword, while Riina and Varys just stared, silent, watching him strain. Hill burst out of the cave and demanded what was happening, and Rihanna looked totally stunned before telling him the map had led them to a sword and everyone was scrambling to grab it. Then Hill's eyes widened as he snapped that it was absolutely impossible. He swore the sword was forged from 300 ingots of orichalcum, and the second Rihanna and Varys heard that, their jaws dropped. So Full bolted to her father, yelling that it was impossible. Yet the man still didn't stop, throwing even more force into it. He lunged upright, threw his sword into the air and bellowed like thunder. Then every goblin erupted in amazement, chanting that this was their legendary general, the Elven. Only now could Hill clearly make out the great warrior's cross blazing on Alvin's chest, and that's when it hit him. That was the secret behind Alvin's overwhelming strength. Suddenly, he slipped his footing and began to tumble backward, sword first. Then Heel and Full went deathly pale, frozen in horror and shock as they witnessed it. Everyone sprinted to the fallen general and the medic crouched over him, claiming he was fine, that the wound wasn't that bad, then blasted recovery magic, while the man gasped that Alvin was brutally tough, but still, it was dangerous. The general heaved himself up and sat down, then out of nowhere, a little full-blooded kid lunged into a crushing hug, and he choked and coughed through the pain. Alvin froze, staring at the girl clinging to him like he was her lifeline, and when her tears finally spilled, she snapped that he was a fool, because she'd been terrified for him the whole time. Alvin shot out an apology and promised he'd be way more careful, just as Heikel and Rihanna, watching from the side, broke into warm smiles. Then the guy spun around and froze because at that exact moment a map was melting on Orichalcum's sword. The legendary dwarf race goes wild for rare minerals, and with their brutal strength, mysterious techniques, and noble hearts, they turn every discovery into something legendary. Hill demanded to know what that map was up to, then boom, the man shoved the weapon into Hill's hands, and even though Hill hesitated, he couldn't believe how fast it all happened. He grabbed the instrument like it was nothing, an orichalcum ice axe, and right after that, Map started cranking out every kind of orichalcum instrument imaginable. The guy was convinced that Map was pure genius, but Heel shut that idea down fast. He didn't think the legend included wanting to be naked. The axe rocketed through the air, explosions blasting on every side, and you could tell something dangerous was closing in fast and it was going to demand action. After snatching the cannon, the orc caught his team screaming that even the general's axe couldn't stand a chance against the danger charging toward them. Rage burned hot in the orc's chest. He refused to show up before his own army looking like that. So he clenched his jaw and strode forward with total resolve. Smiling, the orc clenched his fists so hard they crunched like breaking bones, readying himself for the fight closing in. Spreading his arms in that defiant, bring-it-on stance, the orc roared at the top of his lungs that he was ready to smash the enemy. Somewhere else, a boy caught the scent he'd been craving and started sniffing the fresh air. Then he noticed it too. The air had turned way cleaner, all because of the ventilation his girlfriend kept pushing for. And Map stepped in, upgrading the design with rotating blades that kept pumping fresh air right where it mattered. A little later, the girl stretched her shoulders and said she was ready to get back to the prey, and the guy shot back that he wanted the same thing. because nobody knew when they'd get another chance to dig up something dangerous, so they had to wait. Full shot forward to the forge and decided to forge brand new golems and upgrade from the old ones built safer than before. Because while he was buried in alchemy, the guy figured Map would be out there cooking up new gear. After laying out the new warriors' looks on the ground, the young man snapped to attention. He'd gotten a little too swept up because their job wasn't to look pretty, it was to protect. And these fresh golems, they'd come packed with the defense of orichalcum gear plus a melee sword and a bow. Muttering about the warriors' inventions, the young man didn't see a dark-haired girl creep up, until Rihanna rushed in, apologized for the scare, and he barely heard her, still locked on his plans. The girl slid in and asked the young man if he had free time, then, right after his answer, told him to go with her. Heel stared, shocked by that kind of confidence, but Rihanna just smirked like she knew a secret and said the guy would love exactly what he saw. After a while, the couple finally reached the spot they were told to meet. And even though the girl looked a little lost, the young man was blown away by what he saw. The young man spun his head around and loved what he saw. Lush, beautiful plants lined his side, and the sea shimmered in the distance. He'll praise the girl for her hard work and for building such an incredible garden, then tell her he loves seeing apple trees, vineyards, lemon trees, and even palm trees all thriving there. Even with all the praise pouring in, Rihanna snapped that it wasn't enough, so she dropped a fresh plan and said she knew exactly how to fix it. Right after the opening, the girl slammed the trunk of a palm tree with all her might. Wham, and coconuts rained down like bombs. Heel was stunned, but Rihanna didn't even pause. She bolted forward and kept the momentum. Rihanna sprang upward like a rocket, snatched the falling coconuts midair, and started smashing them open with clean, lightning-fast hits. The trick was done. 1 second the girl was standing, the next she crumpled to the ground, while the shocked heel just stared, baffled at how she pulled it off, and before anyone could react, Rihanna kept moving, already setting up the drink. When she was done, Rihanna leaned in and said you can mix lemon juice with coconut, or just plain water, then taste it. And the young man's jaw dropped because he didn't get where that girl found her strength, especially since he knew she trained in martial arts, but he never expected her skill to be that intense. Once he finishes every last drop, he'll realize that drink hits different, tasty, refreshing, and way better than any ordinary juice. Before the girl can even answer, Alvin's screen suddenly cuts in and interrupts them. The orc shot the boss a question about restarting the loot, and after the guy said yes, he locked eyes on what Alvin was gripping in his hands. The orc yanked the prey down to the ground, then snarled that he'd already smashed a satanic shell on the island's far outskirts. Elvin also made it clear this creature's shell is unbreakable, so the axe it stole can only be recovered by the general, and he'll crush it with raw, overwhelming power. Varys reached the shell, tore it open, and pulled out a strange liquid. Then Map drank it on the spot and instantly cringed, because it turned out the creature cooked that stuff special for its victims. The sage warned that if you process that liquid the wrong way, it turns into a deadly poison that can wreck its victim. Varys shot back right away, saying he was just messing around and that the liquid was only there to make purple paint. While Hill was helping map it out, he couldn't stop thinking he'd need a whole army of warriors to guard his treasures. After he brought his thoughts to life, he forged 14 brand new golems, so with the old ones counted in, that swarm wasn't small at all. From the 6th to the 15th, the warriors carried magic stones. 2 of them trained hard in defensive magic, while 2 others were locked in with one of the 4 elemental attributes. A bell rang out later and one of the orcs shouted that trouble had hit. Then shells tore into them, right in the stretch of wall that still wasn't finished. The orc bragged that the shells were everywhere, and when they scrambled up the wall, they counted over 50 of them. Heel snapped his head toward Varys and demanded to know their opponent's weak spot, only for the sage to say, "Forget fire and cold, these shells can take lightning." He stared at Alvin and told him to back off, saying he needed to test his gallums, not interfere. Then the orca nodded along, promising he'd step in only if things got rough, and the young guy spun to Rihanna, who crackled with lightning magic. The girl was itching to fight, so she demanded spell support, and when the first warrior came into view, he moved in to give the order. The first golem thrust out a hand, letting Heel and Rihanna scramble onto it. Then the couple rocketed up there in a heartbeat. Clinging to his partner, the young man barked an order 6 through 15, sparks fly as his warriors surge to attack their enemy. The shell squad closed in fast, the wall doing nothing to stop them, and those creatures roared with brutal aggression. The moment they closed in, the shells lunged forward to strike, and right then Heel snapped an order to the 6th and 7th golems to brace themselves, and they instantly swallowed the hit, swatting it aside before it could land. To help her friend, she jumped in two, casting magic that woke the lightning the shells feared. Alvin grinned at how fiercely the princess fought, while Varys stared at the giant golems and realized they were basically walking fortresses. Yet Heel didn't even blink. He praised the girl and shouted for the 14th and 15th numbers to strike. The princess's magic finally hit, and it shattered tons of shells to pieces, but her squad didn't stop for even a second. They switched tactics and started spitting their own liquid on the spot, and that forced the golems to pause their assault while their defenses sagged. Rihanna snapped the moment back under control. She shattered the attack and froze the shells in place again with her magic. Alvin watched the fight and realized the golems wouldn't let those creatures reach their liquid to the guy. So, this battle was going to end way sooner than anyone expected. Those magic-using golems were absolute powerhouses, and Rihanna stepped in to crush through the fight fast. Then he praised everyone who showed up and fought their hearts out. Later, the girl volunteered to carry the meat to the freezer so it wouldn't rot in the sun, and the young man nodded, ordering Creation Number 1 to help the princess. Right when the girl turned away from the defeated enemies, a creepy sound snapped behind her, and when she spun around, she saw the shells start lifting back up again. The princess realized the creature was going to strike at his heel, so she leapt onto his back, shielding him from the deadly liquid. She was taking his fate into her own hands. Alvin snapped into action, smashed the shell, and still, when it burst, its contents rained right onto the princess. Heel barked at the orc that he was totally fine, but the second he locked eyes on the girl, his face shot crimson. Rihanna crumpled against her comrade and immediately started blurting apologies, while Heel just stood there, utterly baffled, not knowing what on earth he was supposed to do next. Staring at the young man, the princess snapped that her body was totally numb from the liquid. She couldn't move right, couldn't shift off him no matter how she tried. Hill couldn't take it anymore, so he snapped into action and started stripping away the effect, controlling the guy in front of him. Rihanna thanked the flustered help but still called it out. Her body was stuck in that sticky mess. To help the princess just a bit more, he decides to fetch water so she can scrub the slime off, only for her to snap back that she's got this herself. Then he turns around and spots a shell nearby, and inside it something glints like it's waiting. A young man spotted a blinding flash and Rihanna snapped, "It's a pearl!" One of the rare ones that could even be hidden inside satanic shells. He reached for it, and when he held it, he knew it was real and insanely beautiful. When he hands the object over to the girl, he adds that she can take the pearl. He doesn't even know what it's worth and figures it'll fit her perfectly. Rihanna is stunned by the surprise gift at first, and then, bam, her cheeks flare with a blush. In just a few seconds of realizing what she'd done, Rhaena's face went completely crimson with embarrassment, and the girl started to stutter. He slipped the pearl back, but the princess snapped that she couldn't accept a gift like that and bolted. The young man stood there baffled while the pearl still sat warm in his palm. The next day, the young man was deep in the mines, telling his team to pause and rest, while the girl refused to quit, pushing for even more time working. The young man chose to stay out of it, leaned in to tell the girl not to forget the snack, and then ordered his 15th column, "Call me if anything serious goes down." Shielded by the golems, the crew finally got back to mining, and while one of the captain's crown creatures from the map kept circling, Full was pure fire, pushing himself to work harder than ever. Rihanna jumped right into helping with the food, then started cooking for her companions. And the moment the others saw the dishes, she snatched the plates up while the girl insisted they shouldn't rush because she'd made a ton of shell meat meals. Because those creatures kept nesting near the island and closing in for round 2, the team went for it, crashed the shells, and boom, food, paints, and plenty of other resources right after. But the tides swirling around Shio Reef didn't just drag random trash to the island's shores. They hauled in whatever could be useful too. The ocean didn't just deliver a blessing to the shore, it tossed up something far darker, a dead body drifting lifeless in the water. The young man scanned everything around him and then dove into a material called Tyrian purple, and trust me, when he was done, he looked absolutely unreal. The orcs were hammering and weaving the fabric right there, and the guy couldn't stop staring, because it looked even better than what the nobles used. The sage nodded and said they'd turn it into all kinds of stuff from gear to clothes. He twists around and spots Alvand, ready to show him what the orcs have forged from fresh materials. Then the young man abruptly cuts him off. The orc wore pure misery on his face. Then the second he showed up, he couldn't even find the words to speak to the young man. After what felt like forever, the orc finally managed to start talking. Then he only got one thing out. "He'll come with me to the conquered land." The kid didn't even fight it. He snapped to Vari's side and followed Alvin down to the pier, where a whole pack of orcs was already crowding in, staring at whatever was drawing them in. Turns out the crowd hauled the dead orc's body out of the sea, then circled in close, staring hard like they could figure out who he was. Alvin looked just as stunned as everyone else, then broke the news. Someone hauled the body from the riverbank and dragged it here, and the seal on the dead orc proved it. He belonged to the tribe that wiped out their native home. An orc barked, "Don't be scared of that corpse," and raged on, pushing his comrades to tear it apart right now, because the crowd was furious, realizing the dead man had ties to their fallen friends and relatives. The orcs started kicking the body, and the young man rushed in to stop them. Then he spun toward Alvin and Varys, begging them to calm the creatures, only to realize they were fuming just as badly. He realized that dead orc was an enemy of the Belden tribe, so he couldn't bring himself to stop the young men who were raging at their target, because deep down he felt he had no right to interfere. But then someone screamed for the crowd to freeze right now, and the orcs jerked back like they'd been slapped. Turns out the princess slipped right up to them, furious at what the orcs were doing to the fallen warrior's body. Rhianna snapped that kicking a corpse is a disgrace, and that the entire Belden tribe would burn with lost pride, while the orcs shot back, saying they'd never forgive what got done to their home. The princess got it all, then quietly shut her eyes, yet she still insisted they shouldn't act like this, and reminded everyone that it was Heel who should decide what happens to anyone who shows up on the island. After Rihanna finally smashed the orcs to a stop, the young man turned to the princess with fire in his eyes. He couldn't believe how brave and courageous she'd been, and he felt genuinely grateful. Realizing the mistake, he stepped forward, threw himself over the corpse, and said he understood the orcs' sadness and hatred, then swore he'd never let the ones already dead be mocked. He realized he had to own his actions, then begged for forgiveness, especially for asking him to hold back his fury, because that pressure was brutal. The moment the young man bowed his head, the orcs snapped into action, begging him to lift it, because later he'll tell Varys to handle the dead man's burial. But the sage shuts him down and says the orc in front of them isn't the only one who's fallen. After they scanned the sea, everyone gasped. Enemy soldiers were scattered in the water, all dead from the fight. The orcs hauled 24 corpses onto the island, but the dead weren't just orcs. Among the bodies, they even found kobolds, dead and yet tied to the Belden tribe's worst nightmare. And those same monsters had been battling the enemy orcs too. Heel couldn't wrap his head around how kobolds and orcs could tear into each other like that. Then Varys shot back, saying it was downright odd to find them camped together in a place this remote. As Alvin closed in on the boss, he couldn't shake the weird feeling that the corpses had calmed their wounds. Yet the orc had never seen injuries this brutal, as if they were carved in by savage fangs, and one body looked like it had been burned alive. Because even magic couldn't pull off something like that, the young man figured it out fast. Maybe the orcs and kobolds weren't the target, maybe someone else hit them instead. Alvin snapped back that he couldn't name who it was, but they should have tightened their vigilance and hunted for any armed ships. So now he's putting Varys on funeral duty while Alvin takes command of defending the island. The guy, along with Rihanna, began hunting for anything useful because the island's conditions were brutal. The girl grimaced at the wrecked debris everywhere, and the guy got pulled toward a mysterious, impossible-to-place sound. Rihanna heard a faint squeak coming from the chest right beside him, but when he tried to pry it open, nothing budged. Then he spotted the lock. The young man popped the chest open with magic, and right away, some strange creature burst out and launched straight at his heels. He snatched up the animal, then the guy snapped to it. It wasn't some monster at all, just an ordinary puppy trembling with fear. The tiny creature twitched, yanked itself from the young man's arms, and bolted straight across him. Then the poor guy just froze, so he spun to Rihanna for help. Because the puppy was terrified, it peed on the young man's shirt and the girl burst out laughing, promising she'd clean it up right away. The second the little thing scooted into the princess's arms, it settled down and the young man couldn't help noticing he looked just like Cobalt. The girl insisted the baby wasn't guilty of a thing, so nobody should fight him staying with them on the island. Sure, the young man didn't fully buy it, but he knew they still had to care for that puppy. The very next day, he jumps back to work, smashing through the materials to finish the job. Thanks to that special or that Chalcom ice axe, he gets it done fast. And while he works, his head swirls with a storm of thoughts about that brutal battle on the coastal waters. The young man figured out he had to rip raw materials out of the world to shield the island, so after a bit he decided it was time to check his inventory. Each time he gained more magic stones, the increase slowed to a crawl, so it still wasn't enough to build the sheer magical energy required, and the guy pushed even harder. He wanted the princess to give him full access to use magic too. The young guy fumbled through his inventory and froze. There in his hand was a seed he couldn't trace, like it appeared out of nowhere. Then the moment he tried to figure it out, a girl sprinted up to him, ready to blur his plans with whatever she had to say. Right beside the puppy, those orcs twisted their faces at it, trying to scare it. And the second the animal reacted, they burst into laughter. After the orc, even the spider tried to tweak his expression. But the puppy got even more terrified, and that left the orc completely baffled because they were trying to calm him down, not make him cry. Right then, his daughter's foot slammed into Alvin's back because she wanted her father to stop making those grimaces. The orc blurted out that when Fowl was little, he'd comforted her just like this. Then Heel stepped in, snapped that it only scared the poor pup more than anything, and the instant the puppy spotted its savior, it sprinted over and tucked itself into his arms. That puppy started licking Heel's face and bam, his smile lit up like sunshine. Rena and Full grinned too, watching the little animal celebrate the young man while the general sagged, realizing all his effort got ignored. Rihanna figured the puppy must have thought Heel was his father, then Varys pried open that empty chest and the guy demanded, "So what's in it?" The sage shot back, "Nothing you can see. It's got a double bottom because it's way smaller inside than it looks outside." Even Aura Shaokam knife couldn't pierce the chest's bottom, so after handing the puppy to Rihanna, Heel turned to the old man and tried to save him. They cracked the item open with magic and everyone erupted with relief. Turns out their guesses were dead on because the bottom was truly false. The young man yanked out a stack of books and a strange stone from the chest, and the books spilled the full story of the Tiberius tribe, plus the secret techniques behind Tiberian writing. Turns out that weird object was a thought stone meant to swallow someone's messages inside. No one could decipher what was written in those books, but he'd lock in and follow the sage's lead. Varys looked totally confused, and the young man felt the same unease, because the healing stone the healer held started to glow. Slowly, an image started to form right where everyone stood, and it spilled someone's thoughts to the whole crowd. In the next blink, a dazzling female creature materialized inside the Meshtara, wearing a gorgeous costume and gripping a scepter in his hand. The moment that mysterious woman stepped into view, Heel froze in shock, because he never expected that stone to unleash something like this, and Rihanna, she only stared, stunned by how breathtaking the stranger was. Not long after everyone started hearing the girl's voice, she snapped that if the recording ever played, it meant someone had already torn the seal off her chest. The stranger snapped that she was the queen of the Tibris Al-Kamina, and the newborn the others pulled from the chest was her baby. The second Elvis heard the tribe's name, rage flared in him, but the recording kept going, saying the queen was running out of time and still had to tell everything. Turns out her ship was getting hunted by the legendary Leviathan, and the second everyone nearby heard it, shock hit them like lightning. Alhemina admitted that fighting those orcs wrecked her squad, exhausted beyond belief, and that their weapons and magic wouldn't even scratch the monster. Trapped with no way out, she could only beg someone to take care of the child. All the saviors could get as a reward was a brutal deal: 2 of the fiercest warriors guarding the chest and 3 forbidden books sealed away from everyone who wasn't allowed. The recording started cutting out again, and the woman pleaded once more, begging him to look after her child, then whispered that maybe one day that child would finally hear her final words. Right before the lights went out, the queen forced a smile and said, Kamina loves her baby more than anything. The puppy sat obediently in Ryana's arms, completely baffled by what was unfolding, and only lifted its eyes to see who was there. The moment the image vanished and the recording cut out, the cave swallowed the sound, and an awful silence crushed everyone because the truth they were about to learn made everyone uneasy. Alvin seethed, snapping that their enemy tribe couldn't even handle the air, and the orc just stormed off like he hadn't heard a word, promising he'd tell the guards everything they'd learned. Folk shoved up to Hill and spilled that the Barrison Belden tribes had been tearing into each other for ages, and that her little brother had died in the fighting, which is why her father's rage had been burning so hot. Everyone could see it. Alvin didn't hold a grudge against the baby at all, because there was no way he could ever hate someone that innocent. Vera said the general pinned his son's death on his own shoulders, and even so the sage admitted his brother had fallen in the war too, then insisted he held no grudge against the child since the poor kid wasn't guilty of a thing. He scanned the room and promised he'd handle the little puppy, and every single one of them lit up with approving smiles, cheering him on. The guy started racking his brain over what to name the baby, while Ryana realized his mother had kept the answer secret on purpose, so whoever was going to care for him would name him instead. Then he looked at Ryana and asked what she wanted to name the animal. The princess pushed for the real deal. Heel quickly nodded, scooped up the puppy in his arms, and declared his new name. Then a sign popped up to confirm the real had finally been tamed by a human, but he didn't exactly chase something like that. The moment that puppy's new name hit their ears, you realize Rihanna only coined it by mashing her name with the young man's, and when the princess figured it out, her cheeks flushed hard because her whole scheme got exposed. Varys clocked the disaster right away. This was something that had to be fixed fast. Then he guessed what was being said and instantly remembered Alvin warning him about how the corpses were pulled from the sea. Piecing together the enemy queen's clues and the orc's frantic thoughts, the young man suddenly saw the only answer: Leviathan. Standing beside Map, the young man leaned in and demanded, "Are you sure you'll use your magic?" And when the other guy nodded, the young man sprang into action. With fire magic, he'll slam the seal down and trigger a huge explosion, blasting it the opposite way, while everyone stares forward holding their breath. Right where the attack landed, the Gallum snapped into action and triggered the shield. Magic damage bounced off harmlessly because the defense was rock solid and did exactly what it was built to do. He'd noticed the Orichalchum shield hit even harder when magic was poured into it, and it looked built to last. So the young man turned to Varys and Alvin, ready to ask how the others were doing. The orc grinned and said the maps project was rolling along brilliantly, because with buildings like that, they'd be ready to shield the island, even if giant monsters came crashing in. Staring at the new weapon, he can't help but wonder if Leviathan is real or just a myth, because the truth still gnaws at him. Ilhemina led soldiers and a water monster wiped them out. The talk got ripped apart by barking, and when Alvin spun around, he saw Rachel had scrambled up onto the high structure and couldn't climb back down, so fear hit him and he shook hard. The orc moved to help the animal up, but the moment he reached him, the puppy launched onto his body and knocked Elvin to the ground. So the princess sprinted over and told Reel to stop distracting them from their work. The girl apologized for the baby's behavior and the orc waved it off, saying everything was fine. Then he demanded why the puppy wasn't with Rihanna out in the field. Remembering what just happened, the girl said he'd been nonstop, always there, stopping the other orcs from planting seeds. Then she added that the cobalt cubs matured crazy fast, and before long, Reel would start walking on two paws. He clutched that strange seed in his mind and demanded Varys spill what he'd seen in the guy's inventory. Then the sage shook his head and admitted he'd never laid eyes on seeds like that, and right away Rihanna snapped, "It's Yggdrasil." The men gaped when the girl called out the seed's name, and the princess, who hadn't planned to answer at all, still blurted it out faster than anyone expected. Turns out Hill had heard that the farmer's coat of arms could grant knowledge of plants, and right after that, Varys snapped that he remembered Yggdrasil. The sage insisted those seeds sprout into massive trees that bless every living thing. But that claim was dismissed as pure fairy tale, even if part of you still dared to hope it might actually be true. After moving somewhere new by the sea, he'll keep working and smash his way through the rocks, fight after fight. Rihanna praised the young man for his grit, saying the cultivated lands had turned into a defensive zone for them, though fertile fields were planned nearby. Then he hacked through the entire rock and finally stopped. He realized he already had plenty of supplies, so he decided that since his cave search function would keep digging, he needed helpers to haul the soil out. Thanks to that young man and the spiders, they managed to finish turning the new land into ready soil that night. Then he shoved the seed he'd found into their hands and demanded they hurry up and plant it. Rihanna picked up her needle and decided to plant flower seeds from her hometown, convinced they'd look stunning in that place, and the guy didn't object at all. He just smiled and praised the princess for taking the initiative. A map slid into view beside the guy who'd been staring in silence at the plant. Then the young man blinked at the sprout and realized the seed was bursting into life at lightning speed. Yggdrasil had already burst up out of the ground, so now he's about to ask them if they should use the sunstone to make everything grow faster and smarter. Map quickly shook his head, refusing to use it. Then the young man turned to the princess and begged her to fire off her magic. As soon as the girl hoisted the stone high, it burst into a dazzling sparkle, and the plant shot up in seconds, exploding from a tiny seedling into a towering tree. When the tree finally shot up, everyone gasped, "Yep, the sunstone really works." But those magic-made rains kept hammering down, and still the branches just kept growing higher and higher. He'll ask straight up if Rihanna used the right spell, because things are getting dangerous enough to make this all blow up fast. Because Yggdrasil kept roaring through his growth without stopping, the young man shot out and seized the princess's hand, screaming at everyone to bolt out of the territory right now. The company surged ahead in a hurry, until halfway through, Matt stumbled and the tree's roots yanked at him until there was no way out. I'll scream at it, Mappa trying to pull him back, because Yggdrasil is merciless, and with his roots he just barrels through every last creature, dragging the whole fight the other way. Every single person on the island snapped their heads up and stared at the massive thing now swallowing the land in shadow. He definitely didn't see this coming. The spot they'd cleared to plant a tree in the make fields got swallowed whole by Yggdrasil's roots, because Yggdrasil was raised on that very island. The tree was so massive its roots dangled down, brushing the seawater, and the young man blurted out in pure shock and joy, because what he saw was even bigger than his wildest expectations. Heel didn't stare at the tree for long, because he remembered how his friend got swallowed whole by the roots of a rapidly growing monster, so he knew he had to find him first and help him. The second Rihanna locked eyes on the map, the whole team surged in the right direction. Now it looked like that spot was a mountain hiding in plain sight, and when he finally got to the man, he promised, "We'll get you out soon." The moment the young man stood beside the body, he realized the map wasn't bothered at all. He was just asleep, feeling no pain and not trapped in anything worse. He didn't waste a second. He told Rihanna they had to figure out how to pull the body up to the surface, but she swore the tree was giving off a strange, wonderful smell, and later, he could feel it too. The princess said the tree was practically humming with raw magical power, and Heel was shocked, because the girl pinpointed it fast, proving her magic had shot up in a major way. He'll tell her the magic was insanely powerful and that she looked like a saint. Later, once they spot an aid crew already closing in, he'll decide to push Valis to explore the tree. A little puppy popped up beside the couple, and the trainer barked Heel to get it to a safe spot since they hadn't mapped the territory yet, but the puppy didn't flinch even once. Right then, Rihanna flashed a smile and said the forest felt like a cozy home for the puppy, like he was probably missing that place more than anything. The young man's cheeks warmed with embarrassment, but he grinned at Rahul and admitted she was probably right. Then he suggested they take the puppy to a whole new spot together, because he needed to learn this new place he was living in too. That little animal scampered along the thick roots of a giant tree, while Rihanna hauled the young man up a brutal hill of uneven ground, slipping, straining, and making every step a fight. When he finally reached the border of the territory, hauled himself up to a spot with a breathtaking view of the sea, and man, his heart lifted because the water looked unbelievably beautiful. Staring into the distance, the young man said he could see plenty from here, but his stomach dropped when he spotted not a single ship, because it meant the kingdom had totally erased him. Rihanna pressed the young man about how he'd ended up alone on this island, then snapped, apologized for the blunt question, and confessed she'd been dying to know how he got here in the first place. The young man slid beside her and admitted he hadn't told a soul, Then he swore he wouldn't keep anything from the princess, not if it meant hiding the truth on purpose. The young man forced a sad smile and admitted he'd been kicked out of his own kingdom because his presence was completely useless. And just listening to him, you could feel how miserable and rough this whole ordeal had been for him. The girl couldn't process it at all. She blurted that a man like him couldn't be useless, not when he busts his butt for the whole island, helping her, the puppy, and even all the orcs. He fidgeted with the tiny jar at his neck, then admitted he'd never given a damn about ruling the capital, so in his family's eyes he was utterly boring. Looking back on his past, the young man remembered drifting past the servants' old buildings, bolting from home, and losing himself in all kinds of books. Compared to the cruel way that Guy got treated in the castle, the island was basically heaven for Heike until one day, after he slipped out of the castle again, the young man stumbled onto something. He froze when something snapped and made noise in the barrel beside him, then he lunged to check, and a tiny creature popped right into his face. He snapped to attention and realized a demon was right in front of him, dangerous as hell. But the thing was chained tight, trapped so it couldn't slip away. The young man couldn't wrap his head around why someone like this would end up in the capital, but then he saw it. The demon was being crushed and mistreated, with fresh wounds showing all over its body. He snatched that book off the floor and decided to gamble on recovery magic to help the monster heal its wounds. And the very next day, the young man stormed back to the same spot again. The young man kept feeding the demon and even named him Lopez, but every time he tried to crack open the lock around the creature's neck, it refused to budge. Chasing a way to rip the demon free of its shackles, the guy devoured books, practiced magic, and soaked up every moment with Lopez. Because with him, heal worked way better than it ever did with anyone else. He told the creature, "Even if I can't pick the lock on your neck, I'll just hire someone who can," and he made that promise to Lopez. After a while, he finally heard footsteps coming his way, and when he turned, he realized he wasn't dealing with one man but more. The stranger clearly didn't get it either, because this place sat right in the middle of the slums. Right in front of him stood a man with blazing golden hair and skin as pale as fresh snow, and the young man realized he was just as handsome as the girl. As he spun around, the blonde guy muttered that his older brother was suddenly way more energetic than usual, so much so that it felt totally out of place inside those castle walls. The young man snapped that he'd stay just as useless as before, then the truth hit. The guy was Oren, Hyley's younger brother, the 18th prince of the kingdom of Sunfall. Right up until Gil finally met Lopez, Oren and his crew drilled him non-stop, because that demon was getting wrecked every day, trapped with zero way to fight back or break free. The young man snapped a lesson in front of everyone at training. Magic is all about precision, because if the creature can't resist, you can command it to do anything you want. After showing them the moves, the prince leaned in and told his friends to sharpen their skills on the demon too, because that thing was kept just for exactly this moment. Everyone there erupted into action, abilities flared, magic surged, and they poured it straight at the helpless creature. Oran loved every second of it, so badly he craved watching Lopez break, except he couldn't slip away because a brutal spell nailed him to the crowd. He spotted the rest of the elite academy students standing beside his younger brother, all trying to stop the demon. Without killing it, their goal was to smash it, cripple it, and end the threat. Gil, crouched behind the next wall, was hiding, pure fear crashing over him, because he knew he couldn't stand a chance against those magic prodigies who trained hard at the academy. Crackling laughter filled the air and the young man squinted hard, refusing to look at what was going on. Lopez got badly hurt again, and now he'll tear himself up for it. The second the company peeled away, the guy bolted straight to the demon and started begging forgiveness for failing to shield him from danger, while the creature just lay still like it couldn't move. Ever since that day, Heel nursed him, chasing every chance to soothe the demon's pain. No matter how hard the young man fought, he just couldn't muster enough strength to save Lopez, and Oren's crew kept crashing back in again and again, flaunting their dominance. The young man still couldn't crack the lock on the demon's neck, not even now, because if that guy hadn't stepped in, Lopez would have been dead long ago from the injuries that demon dealt him. While everyone else trained, Oren expected to stay stuck on the sidelines, but he got hit with a shock when another prince strode over to him and his crew, leaving Oren wondering why his brother had actually shown up. The young guy stammered out, begging Oren to stop beating that demon and let it walk free, because the older brother couldn't stand sharing that pain anymore and just wanted his friend to be okay. He shot his palm back in the air, waiting for one of his co-workers to toss him gloves, and Heat didn't even flinch because his little brother cracked him hard across the face. The blonde kid blurted to his brother, "We're royal blood," then told him the real twist. He didn't just spy on Oren, he went there to protect the demons too. He didn't waste time with his older brother. He shoved forward, threatened him with magic, and demanded he move or he'd scorch him to ash, demons and all. Once he hears this, he'll beg Dorn right there as the crowd erupts in laughter, watching him flaunt his superiority over a member of the royal family. Then fate throws a curveball at heel. Oren shoots his hands up and declares his brother can do whatever he wants, because they're family and family means they've got to listen to each other. Still in shock, he swore he'd heard wrong, so when Oren answered, "I'm already sick of training on that creature," he made it clear his older brother would come pick him up. Over the moon, the kid immediately stopped, because his little brother yelled at him to take the demon if he could without even getting his collar back on. Or else the demon can only be dragged off once he freezes him solid with that collar, because if he doesn't, the prince will obliterate him, and if the demon doesn't vanish from the capital within 10 seconds. He'll try to tell his brother he couldn't pull it off, no matter how hard he pushed, yet Oren didn't care for a second and he started counting down. The young man kept blasting magic at the locks, trying again and again, but every single attempt failed, and the crowd by the poison laughed like they were watching a royal family member crumble in real time. Lopez flashed one final smile in his short life, right when Oren's countdown slammed to 0. The prince grinned because he already knew it was coming. 10 seconds later, the demon got obliterated, and he still slumped beside his dead friend's body, staring in disbelief that there was nothing he could do to save him. As Oren stormed out, he spat again that his older brother was pathetic and useless, because he couldn't save the one he wanted so badly, and that's why the demon set everything ablaze. Fists clenched tight, the young man's hatred for his younger brother burned so hot he lunged to strike. Then the prince's shield slammed the plan out of reach. Or calmly pressing the question on why he was acting like this. Because it was his fault for what went down, Lopez's older brother broke down in tears, demanding to know why the prince would do something like that to Lopez. He snapped around and blurted out a question that everyone already knew the answer to, because nobody doubted he couldn't even bring himself to touch his younger brother's body. When he snaps back to the present, he ends it by revealing he later woke up in a hospital bed, and then, bam, he got kicked out of the kingdom for good and left stranded on this island. With a small jar clutched in his hands, he admitted he'd saved Lopez's ashes, because once they became friends, he couldn't break his promise, not when he couldn't shield him from the killer. After hearing the young man's tale, the princess snapped back that nothing was as the heel, no, not at all, had thought, because he wasn't useless one bit. He'd always stepped in to help the island's people, and even before that he'd tried to help Lopez. Crying, Rihanna told him he'd always push himself to help anyone who needed it, so there's no way he'd ever be useless. When he saw the girl crying, worry hit him hard. Why did he even say all that story now? The princess started to apologize for blowing up, but she was still furious that he'd walked away with a "he's so good" kind of smug approval. He pulled a handkerchief from his backpack and shoved it into Rihanna's hands, hoping it would cool her down, but he couldn't shake the worry that telling her about his past princess was the wrong move. Her reaction was pure, overwhelming emotion. Doubts barely paused before the thought snapped out of his head, trusting the girl with dark hair. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he should have told her right away, so she'd have the crucial info about her friend. After they walked a bit farther, the path opened up into a giant flower meadow, flowers everywhere so bright and thick they couldn't help but stop and stare as they moved through. Peering closer, the girl realized these were the very flowers that grew in Rihanna's homeland, and that meant the seeds she planted earlier had finally sprouted. Once again, it proved just how insanely powerful the Sunstone really was. Watching Rio dash around that huge space, he'll grin, because deep down he was scared for his safety there. Then the girl steps in and tells the young man exactly what she's been thinking about the whole Lopez situation. Rihanna leaned in and begged Heel not to brush this off. If he ever found himself in trouble, the girl wouldn't be the only one rushing over. The entire island would throw its weight behind him. After all, every creature revered him and they knew he didn't just fight for himself. He kept pushing for all of them too. Even though Heel had been through a ton of brutal stuff in his past, he wasn't alone anymore. People stood by him and wouldn't back off no matter what life threw at him. Heel thanked the princess for her words and her encouragement hit him like a spark. After Vera studied the tree, he figured out its leaves could be turned into a powerful ointment, a soothing tea, or even a tasty juice. But mess with the amount and you'll either get hit with a nasty headache or slip into heavy drowsiness. Even the branches were feather-light and tough as steel, like something you'd swear was forged to last. So once they figured that out, they went right to work, slicing out cuttings to build pickaxes from that tree. As the sun started to sink, he snapped that he needed a break, time for dinner, and Folo shot back that she wasn't tired at all. He figured the tree's branches were probably helping her stay fresh. That massive tree rained blessings on every living soul on the island. Then, once it was flowering, he'd stare at it like a promise and wait for the fruits to ripen while the orcs stepped in to help harvest. Life on the island didn't keep leveling up. More resources and new knowledge just meant bigger expectations. And before he crawled into bed, he'd be up in his head, plotting how to make his home even better tomorrow. He jolted awake in the dead of night because the puppy wouldn't stop whining, and when the young man rushed over, he saw something was wrong and asked what had happened. He looked miserable. Later, all his friends finally trudged down to Heel's room and panic hit when they heard Reel crying. Rihanna scooped the animal into her arms, and the young man figured he'd just woken up from a nightmare. The puppy looked like it was suffering, and when he glanced at his left eye, he saw a bizarre mark staring back, one that definitely wasn't there before. After a few seconds, a dazzling glow erupted in the room, and it blinded everyone as they stared at the puppy it came from. In the next heartbeat, a shimmering thread flashed to life beside everyone's left eyes, crackling like lightning, briefly stitching Heel and his comrades together so they could finally see exactly what they needed. Suddenly, memories flashed right in front of the company's eyes like they were living the moment firsthand. While out at sea, a raging storm battered their ship, and the whole thing started to fall apart piece by piece. Blood and bodies littered the ship, and he locked onto the faces he'd seen before, those he and the orcs had hauled from the sea days back. Right there too, glinting in plain sight, was the scepter that once belonged to Reel's mother. She was battered and bleeding, yet she still fought to hold up a protective dome so the ship wouldn't fully sink. But there was no saving her because the only help close by were fallen warriors who'd been killed by that massive monster. Still, the tribe's queen couldn't keep the defense up for long. Then the dome shattered and a ray slammed the ship, smashing not just her staff but the woman herself, leaving her badly wounded. Looking back, it felt like Rixil's mother was saying goodbye to every cherished thing in her life. Then she lit up the seal with magic for the very last time. With no other option and a sliver of victory, she lunged straight into the monster's jaws, staring down terror and understanding. This was it. She was going to die right here. The moment the company caught sight of Leviathan, they bolted back to their room because he'd waste no time demanding, "Did you all see what I just saw?" The team's reactions said it all. They'd witnessed the exact same thing. Nobody questioned it. The sea monster was Leviathan, and the moment the truth hit, the young man's whole body tensed up hard because its strength, power, and massive size were downright terrifying. Once everyone finally steadies, he'll drag the sage in to study the mark that just appeared on the puppy's eye, because he needs to know how it could hit all of them at once, right before the day his mother died. Varys snapped back that he'd never heard of such a power because it basically grants outsiders clairvoyance. The old man leaned in and said, "I know what it is, it's the Eye of God," and with it, they could witness what happened in the past. Remembering that last moment when the queen was still alive, he finally gets it. Clairvoyance let that puppy pass along the truth of his mother's death without even realizing what it was saying. And the worst part, he was still too young to understand. When he finally steps out to the people, everyone on that island, young and old, inside the houses and out, will swear they saw the exact same thing as that young man. And it all comes from clairvoyance because the orcs' fear snaps into place when they realize Leviathan might strike their island someday. The men started panicking for their families, so they cornered the young man and demanded to know what they should do, before a massive monster crashed onto the island and wiped it out, or before every last orc on it met the same fate. Panic hit the creature and it blurted and scrambled over itself, trying to reach the young man to fire off their question, while the young man barely even moved, trapped in his own thoughts about healing himself, because he had no idea how to handle the danger closing in. After he stared down those orcs, one thought slammed into his mind: how he could finally step up for the island's people and shield them all from Leviathan. Watching the young man look completely lost, Alvin stepped in, opened his mouth and blared at the massive crowd, snatching every single eye in the room right onto him. The general looked so rock-solid confident that the young man's fear spiked. He never expected that thunderous shout. Elvin spun toward the crowd and demanded why every resident wore such a gloomy face, reminding them to remember the brutal battles they'd survived. The orc bluntly warned that if the people keep getting crushed, their leader won't stand a chance to save them. Then he glanced at Heel and Alvan smirked like, "Yeah, this dude is definitely showing up to the census." Heel bit back his doubts, took the silent advice to heart and told the orcs to shut up, breathe, and listen. Because even if Leviathan comes crashing in, panic won't save them. They need to brace and prepare for the fight. The young man was convinced that if they all teamed up, no monster could stand a chance. So he shot them a command, begging them to pour every last ounce of strength into him. Orcs were tearing up the gathering spot with noise and chaos, proof their morale hadn't been crushed, and they actually believed every word their leader was spitting. After a while, the teen huddled indoors and everyone stood there clueless. "We'll handle it," he promised, but he had no clue how. After witnessing that legendary fight with his own eyes, the guy finally clocked it. His magic won't touch Leviathan, so he threw his focus onto a map. The moment the young man asked the creature what kind of weapon could even hurt a monster like that, Map snapped quiet and frowned, because he didn't have a clue yet, while Vera insisted they only needed to dodge, not fight, and avoid getting slammed by it. He couldn't wrap his head around how that monster's massive body could squeeze into that cave, and he also figured that big hall where they'd stumbled on the golems would make a perfect hideout. Elvon blurted out what would happen to the island if Leviathan ever struck, and he even offered to get out so it wouldn't drag him down with it, but then he snapped that he had a plan already. When he reached one of the caves, he stared up at the ceiling and suddenly knew he couldn't keep delaying it anymore, especially because he wasn't alone. Clenching the pickaxe harder in his fist, the young man could feel it. This was the moment everything would finally spill out, and the secret truth buried on their island would be laid bare for him and every one of the residents. So earlier, when the talk swung back to that plan, Heel snapped that he'd grab fresh materials, because they'd been stuck on the island for ages, and the moment the mining dug deeper, the stones they uncovered got better and better. He clocked that she was hiding secrets in every breath, then hinted that something down below was out there waiting, something strong enough to fight Leviathan head-on and even tear it apart. Heel spit out his doubts after that monologue, but Ryana steadied him. Then the sage snapped that it was time to move and test Real's powers. Even though the puppy couldn't rein in his powers, his clairvoyance let them steer straight through the caves and find the best path fast. So when the team took off, Full pushed for Recall to be the one on point. A little puppy dozed peacefully inside the backpack, and while the young man fought to wake him up, Full kept on helping too, watching those spiders swing pickaxes like they meant business. The whole island huddled together for one mission, throwing themselves into brutal work to fortify the defenses and drive Leviathan back. And every part of the land was packed with trees that had sprouted thanks to the blessing of the Yggdrasil. Everything was moving at full throttle, so the defense went up fast and the orcs worked in perfect sync. While the guy was stuck in the cave, the puppy suddenly jolted awake in his backpack and bolted off somewhere. Then we found out it wasn't danger at all, it just needed to go potty. Real had been gloomy lately, but his powers kicked in and let him spot the exact stones they needed. Sometimes the little puppy would stumble on answers all by himself, then even when nothing changed, everyone still cheered him for trying. Weeks went by and one day, out of nowhere, he started digging furiously in the exact same spot. Staring at where the puppy had been digging, he saw nothing out of the ordinary and doubt gnawed at him, so he stepped closer and decided to check anyway. With a pickaxe in hand, he started striking just right and digging with razor care. Then the earth beneath him gave way, and the poor fools scattered like they'd just seen a ghost. The girl edged right up to the pit and asked the young man if he was okay. He said he was fine. But then he stumbled on a hidden passage underground that nobody saw coming. But the thing that really stunned the young man was this massive golem sitting stone still right in front of him. When he stared closer at the goal, it hit him like a punch. He couldn't rise because he was missing the one crucial detail that could bring him back to life. Heel froze in shock. Right in front of him sat a massive golem, but it wouldn't activate since he had no core. And at first glance it looked like he was made of calcum, like some kind of living material. The weapon beside the golem stole the whole spotlight, especially that gorgeous silver sword. Funneler looked at it and suddenly got uneasy, but he still pushed through and got right up to the guy. The moment the young man reached for the blade, surprise hit him hard because the sword felt insanely powerful. While Map was hammering out yet another weapon at the forge, a weird sound ripped through the air. And that's when he finally realized the sword couldn't be broken, wondering what it was forged from. After the young man slammed the gun, Map lunged in fast and the kid froze in terror. He never saw that coming. He spun around hard, stunned by how fast Mop bolted up to him, his legs already wobbling. Until not long after, the man started acting downright weird, like something was seriously off. The map dropped, but he let it fall on purpose, like he just spotted something that hit him with a rush of impossible, wordless admiration. Later, Map suddenly started bowing to the sword, and the fool and full caught him off guard. Then the young man realized something. That guy was acting way more energized than he ever did. Next, Map grabbed the sword and hauled it up out of the pit. Watching the man with his eyes, he figures the Map was trying to recycle the gun, because in his gut, that thing was way too valuable to waste. Matt sprinted straight at the orcs and wasted no time. He started showing them exactly how to melt the sword he'd brought fast. He'll stride up to one of the workers and demand what happened to the man, and they'll tell him the Map ordered them to crank up the temperature because it wasn't hot enough to melt. Then Rihanna pops in and immediately asks what that sword they found is so useful for. Heel begged the girl to step in and use her magic, and when the couple finally crept up to the stove, the young man nudged the princess to blast the flames so the heat shot up fast. The young man's plan hit like a spark. Once the furnace started blazing harder, the orcs erupted in cheers, shouting that the sword had to be carried right away, because keeping that fire alive was suddenly getting too hard. Once everything was ready, the orcs started melting the sword under Map's watch, pouring molten metal into molds. Then they had to forge fresh tools and weapons right away. Turns out the miners struck mithril. It's the hardest, most magic-soaked metal on the planet, strong enough to slay gods, and Heel practically gaped, because that's exactly what he'd been hunting for. Joy exploded in the young man's chest as he clutched the man in his arms and cheered that they'd finally made it. No doubt on the Map, because he'd forged a weapon so strong it was pure proof. Before anyone could blink, the defensive wall was finished, and the whole island erupted in relief because it looked like a real fortress, just like it had to, since Leviathan was too brutal to ignore. Heel and his crew were up against a legendary beast, so everybody needed to come ready with a dozen plans, because this fight could explode in any way none of them saw coming. This is how Shio's first battle ignited. After nightfall, he decided to stalk through the underground territory until he caught sight of Alvin, trading words with Riel. The young man lunged to get closer, but a girl snapped, "Don't say a word, don't ruin this," while Alvin quietly gathered his strength, readying himself to finally speak. The orc dropped to one knee, bowed to the puppy, and apologized for insulting his mother, because that sting had been gnawing at him for ages and guilt finally crushed him. Elvin said that, and as the tribe's general, he knew the queen was a killer warrior, someone who would sacrifice himself for the army, and then the man petted the animal with a grin. The Elvin swore they'd make sure his mother was avenged, no matter what, and the couple who overheard them clamped down on their nerves, thinking the very same thing, while the puppy didn't get a single word and only tapped the orc with his paw. Something sharp flew into his eyes and the man yelped, "Yeah, it happened a lot, but the moment Leviathan showed up, everyone knew the same truth. You'd have to trust only yourself, then fight." Right then, bells blared outside and he sprinted out to find out what happened, because there's no way Leviathan could have shown up that fast. Alvin just said it wasn't a monster. As they sprinted toward the wall's edge, they all gasped. Ships had suddenly burst onto the sea, and two of them were charging straight for the shore at full speed. Vale stepped up to the young man and thrust a telescope into his hands so he could zoom in on the swimmers closing in on them. Then, once he spotted the ship's flag, he'd instantly know exactly who it was. Elvin confirmed the flag was theirs, the orcs who attacked them, and that meant there were survivors out there seething for revenge. But then chaos erupted at sea. Those watching never saw it coming. Ships started battling out there, and from the shore nobody could tell who was really fighting. Rikiel snapped into loud barks again, and his crystal-clear voyance powers kicked back on. Because once he remembered how pups mark the trail, he immediately knew something terrible was coming. Staring out at the ocean, he'll feel it hit. An insane wave of magical power surging straight from the water, and the waves keep climbing higher and more ferocious, as if they're building toward something huge. Everyone in the room went pale, because the thing their ships were battling just might be the same person they'd been scrambling to defend against on that island. In the very next heartbeat, one of the ships got cleaved clean in two. One brutal strike from the monster that was tearing into the orcs smashed a whole ship like it was nothing. A colossal black shadow burst up from the water, shot into the sky with a spine-chilling scream, and she unleashed the wrath of the seas, terrifying everyone who saw it with what was coming next. A second ship stayed afloat and kept firing its cannons to drive the monsters back, but the pounding waves battered the water so hard that the cores couldn't punch through to hit the target. The projectiles finally slammed into the monster, but they did nothing, like its armor sprouted on the spot and kept it moving without a scratch. Of the two ships, only one stayed standing, and he fought with everything he had just to keep from getting torn apart, while the crowd watched the chaos unfold, frozen, not knowing what to do next. The orcs' panic kept swelling, then wham! An axe slammed into the bell, blasting a thunderous ring that snapped everyone back to calm. Alvin yelled at everyone, telling them to get off Monsieur Her and lock in positions the same way they practiced for battle. While the orc snapped back that he wasn't here to help anyone, he just wanted to destroy Leviathan. He ordered Fallen to rush everyone to a safe cave, and the girl nodded, then grabbed a promise that the young man wouldn't die or give up. The young man swore he'd be okay and proved it. His comrades didn't let fear win. They grinned hard and steadied the ones shaking at the thought of the coming battle. Barris didn't hold back. He barked orders to the orcs and demanded a ballista, and the whole crew surged into action, shouting instructions back and forth to get the defense ready at lightning speed. In a blink, the ballista was bolted and ready. Then the orcs hauled it to the very lip of the protective wall and fired it toward the seed of fire the moment the order hit. Alvin blared that the mithril tip forged by Map would have slammed straight through the monster's body, because that material was so tough it could pierce anything. With the tip aimed at C, the orc running the ballista barked an order: slide it 6 units left, 3 units up. With a shot this impossible to miss, he cranked the focus to the max. The moment the monster surged close to the ship, Alvin spotted it and screamed, "Orcs, open fire!" then ordered them to unleash a shot right away. The arrow ripped through the air and kept surging forward, even though it was heavy. Its material made that weight hit like a hammer. The monster never saw it coming. Something surged up from the ground and flew straight at him, and before he could react, an arrow slammed past his defenses. But he finally clocked her just as she was almost within reach. In the next heartbeat, something slammed them that Heel and his crew never saw coming. The monster snapped past the arrow as if it wasn't even there, and for a split second, doubt bit hard and victory suddenly felt shaky. He screamed, demanding, "Did you see that right?" Because that massive monster slipped past the arrow like it was nothing, so quick, so agile it was unreal. Still, there was no way he was giving up. One more shot. Those cannonballs bounced off the monster like jokes, and he slid out of the way of every arrow with deadly grace. So yeah, it was time to stop forcing it and switch tactics fast, because the monster clearly feared those arrows too, meaning we had to hit her, just not the same way. The monster clocked the threat coming from the islanders, and instead of backing down, he crept closer. Then he barked, "Get the second arrow loaded right now." The young man also swore he and the golems would trap that monster. So Rihanna had to get ready to throw magic fast, and while warriors 10 and 11 aimed for the ice, the rest had to unleash the wind. To hold the monster back, the golems whipped up a brutal blizzard by mixing their elements. but it was just the setup because they only needed the storm to line up their arrow. The plan worked because the element didn't flinch under that brutal force, but all it did was hold the line in front of the real defense. The vortex still failed to stop the threat. This monster kept closing the distance, step by brutal step, and the sage realized magic just couldn't stand up to the creature's raw power. The monster slammed to a halt out in the sea, frozen solid, because the Gallums teamed up with wind and ice to lock it down. He insisted that everything was lining up perfectly, so they had to keep freezing the water by the monster because if they did, it wouldn't have a chance to dodge the arrow. But then the monster clocked the truth. If it couldn't move, it would still wreck the island, not with its body but by blasting attacks straight from its mouth, while the young man watched in shock as its scales slowly thawed out of the ice that had trapped it. Even so, the monster still geared up and started charging its beam at the island. So the young man snapped the golems into action, making the shield swell bigger to stop the blast cold, or at least bounce it back. It was already hopeless to stop that thing. Its strike was almost ready, so all they could do was brace and wait for the moment it finally hit. After a while, the monster yanked its mouth open and blasted a brutal beam straight at a tiny island. Then the hit detonated into a massive explosion, wrecking the island's defenses and smashing the residents' protection to pieces. Even with the shield straining to blunt the hit, the golems still got pierced by lightning, because the monster wouldn't stop attacking long enough for a retaliation. He'll realize fast, the beam is about to slam into the land right behind the fortress wall, and if he doesn't push harder, everything goes down. The beam kept going for ages because the monster poured every ounce of strength into shattering the barrier and ripping apart the island it was fired from. After a while, a brutal explosion tore through the air, and that shockwave screamed one thing: this team finally had one more shot to loose an arrow at their opponent. After the next phase of the fight wraps up, the golem's shields get shattered, and he slumps a little to the ground. He's drained because the magic he used took everything he had. Still, the opponent refused to quit. He dove back underwater, chasing a faster route to the island. Rihanna leaned over and asked Alvan if the ballista was ready, and the orc snapped back that it was. Now he just wondered if the creature could pull off that dodge a second time. After he fires off yet another shot, he's praying that, with the monster right in his face, it won't be able to dodge this one. Everyone in the defense stared at what happened next, praying this brand new arrow would fly true and slam straight into the monster. Everything played out exactly how they planned. Once the young man begged the princess to cloak her with invisibility, the arrow slipped through the creature's scales before it even realized she was there, leaving the monster with zero time to dodge. The orcs finally landed their hits and cheered with wild joy, but Alvin snapped, "Don't you dare relax, load the next projectile right now. We're striking again." Turns out that arrow was yanked along by a rope, but it wasn't ordinary. Spider thread braided into steel cable meant to stop the monster from diving and escaping with a swim. Then Heel snapped the order: send in the 5th and 6th golems and attack. The warriors snapped into action at the command, unleashing powers that let them strike from miles away. The golems rammed the monster with bindings until it couldn't twitch, but that thing wasn't about to sit still and wait for the next round of attacks. The enemy started clawing its way loose, and that's why the golems couldn't hold their ground for long. Backpedaling, the monster smashed the gears that powered the ballista, and he'll bark at Alvin that they won't last much longer. The orc barked orders for his crew to yank the ballista into perfect alignment, aiming that projectile straight at her head, because this way they could strike with way more deadly success. Strange things started happening. Creatures burst out from under the monster's scales, slithering in and attacking anyone nearby, their liquid hurling disaster everywhere. Heel watched the golems start to buckle as creatures slammed into them, and the young man stood there completely lost, not understanding a thing. Then everyone watched as the warriors got swarmed by sea pursuers, and tiny creatures started nipping at the golems until their work ground to a halt. The beetles latched onto the biggest sea monsters, and just like that, they stumbled onto the one they were after. After a while, he realized golem number 1 was getting torn apart piece by piece. Elvin snapped orders to his team: aim the bow at those tiny creatures and drop them all, until every last golem was finally destroyed. The beetles crawled up the walls and climbed straight for the defensive fortress, while the monster started to recognize the chains that trapped it. He yanked the chain tighter, then the monster snapped into action, smashing down every golem and hurling them into the wall until it was finally free. Rage hit, he swore, and his head was gone in an instant. Once the opponent broke free, horns erupted from his back, so sudden it left everyone staring in shock. Once he studies it all up close, he'll finally see it. The horns weren't the same ones the monster had used before to fire. In the very next moment, Ray started blasting out as the monster's horn spikes sprouted and snapped toward the island. Heel was absolutely terrified that the next wave would swallow everyone trapped on the fortress, so the moment the young man unleashed his magic, he roared at everyone nearby to duck under the shield, because the attacks were coming back again. The golems strained to hold the shield even as their strength crumbled, and everyone else had no choice but to follow the healer's orders, duck under the dome and keep hidden before the blows could land. Rihanna steadied him so he could hold the defense, but it drained her, so he vowed to lift her spirits and keep her from giving up, because now they couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. Then, after what felt like forever, the attacks finally died down and everyone dared to believe the monster was done for. Turns out that wasn't even the plan. This monster simply decided to pick a new target, and instead of firing those deadly rays, it lashed out with its tail. He'll realize it too late with no time to react, and since that barrier is gone, he knows the monster can now tear right through the protective wall. The very next instant, a brutal hit landed. Your enemy's tail smashed straight into the ballista spot where the orcs had it set up, and everything started to buckle, crumbling piece by piece until the whole structure sank. When it went under, not a single resident was left in sight. Huddled in the bunker, everyone shook with panic, terrified of what was pounding outside, shouts, crashes, and explosions roaring above their heads. With no one knowing what would hit next, staying calm felt impossible. Adults scrambled to hush the kids who wouldn't stop sobbing, and one little boy blurted, "Are we losing our home again?" His mother snapped back that the hero would shield them like everyone else, and the island would be saved from the monster. With the monster's attack shattering their defensive wall, the young man got trapped, unable to scramble away fast enough. And while he cared deeply about his team, he forgot to think about his own safety at all. To stop the young man from going too hard, Seville caught him. Then the guy later thanked him, and when he finally got to his feet, he realized he was running out of time, so he barked for the 6th and 7th golems to guard every resident. The moment the young man swept his eyes around, he froze, everything was wrecked to the ground, and there was nobody beside him. His whole squad had vanished into thin air, and the worst part, not a single scream, not even a whimper of someone hurt. Panic slammed into Heil, and he started screaming his comrades' names, desperate to find anyone, only for creatures to crawl out from under the rubble, right from where the monster had been hiding them. Monsters surged in front of the young man along with the beast that had just smashed the wall, and the whole world felt hopeless, but he didn't even think about running or surrendering, because in his mind there was only one ending: victory. The young man could feel his luck running out as the pursuers kept hammering him without a pause, so he snapped into action, casting magic and blasting the creatures with lightning to tear a path straight through. Those monsters didn't get destroyed at all. Seconds later, they burst back up and kept hammering the young man, and he felt his strength slipping away right there in real time. By snapping the shield up, he healed the blows they threw back and even kept the sealed one nearby safe. But the creatures still pressed forward, creeping in. Suddenly, someone yelled at CL to bolt right now. Then he heard that voice clearly and realized he wasn't alone after all. Toei suddenly showed up in front of a young man. He just helped that guy fend off the attacking creature's assault. The princess swung the weapon with deadly precision, and with one blazing strike she wiped out every monster that lunged at the guy. Heel collapsed onto the ground, utterly exhausted, then lifted his eyes and immediately recognized Rihanna. The moment he saw she was safe, relief flooded his face. Turns out the girl could protect herself with nothing but a farming cultivator tool, and Heel still clawed herself to her feet, yelling at the princess. The princess didn't even look back. She started commanding the creatures, vowing she'd stop their attacks on the young man and do whatever it took to help him. With everything finally clear, Heel erupted in relief, shouting that Rihanna was okay, and the girl immediately fired back, asking if the guy was fine too. Just like that, arrows rained in from the distance and wiped out the last of the creatures, so Heel immediately whipped around, staring at the spot where the movements had started. As the rubble shifted, Heel's surviving comrades crawled out, golems standing guard so they wouldn't get crushed to death under the wreckage of the defensive wall. Varys snapped an order to keep firing, raining shots to shield Heel from afar. While the archers kept raining arrows, the golems started hauling massive stones overhead, hurling them open just so warriors with guns could burst in and brawl at arm's length. The orcs crashed into Alvin's attack, and they knew this wasn't just a fight for themselves. It was for the princess and for their boss, too. With their island and their peaceful life on the line, every single one of them dug in and refused to run. As the oak blasted back with its guns, the golems surged in and blasted with magic too. Then the general finally closed in on Hill, blurted out an apology for the delay, and Hill just shook it off, smiling that he only cared everyone had lived and made it back together with him. Right after that, the territory got blasted again. One blazing stream of fire roared from the monster's mouth. The golem guarding the edge of the defensive wall was wiped out, and that monster surged forward, tearing past the defenses with no stopping it. The creature slithered closer and closer, stalking right toward the inhabitants to finally shut down the brutal battle that had dragged on for ages. That monster was absolutely massive. It kept smashing forward without stopping, and it felt like nothing on earth could ever bring it down. The sage said his power was so terrifying that he shattered the biggest golem in seconds. Then he warned that all that's left is to try a plan that's so dangerous and risky it's almost not worth reenacting. The kid understood the danger was huge, but Leviathan slid way too close, so he had to move now. The princess didn't hesitate anymore, she just grabbed his hand, and he couldn't figure out why she did it. In the very next second, a wild glow erupted around the couple, like the girl was handing her powers straight to a guy who'd clearly been waiting for this moment his whole life. Rihanna admitted she didn't have much mana, but she knew this young man needed it even more, and she demanded he swear he'd win this battle for everyone on that island. Heel promised that he'd do everything in his power to keep that promise, because it wasn't just the girl and his team betting on him. Everyone crammed inside the bunker was counting on him too, from scared kids to determined adults, all desperate to survive. Staring up at that towering monster, everyone saw it twitch into readiness like it hadn't even used a drop of strength. Then, moments later, it blasted a fireball straight into the people packed at the fortress. Since the battle wouldn't quit, he decided to yank Leviathan's attention away so a real shot at saving the people could finally work. As he bolted in the opposite direction, he roared for the monster to chase him. And since Rihanna traded away her powers so the young man could have more, he blasted lightning magic to rile up the monster, then drove it to hunt only humans. The monster didn't even notice it was slaughtering its own allies, while Heel, perched on a spider, shoved Taran forward, begging him not to stop and to sprint harder, and Taran fired up a shield to block the next sudden strike. The princess was losing it. She rushed to him and blurted that all his team could do was trust him and bide their time for the right moment, and Alvin snapped back, saying he wouldn't just sit around waiting. He wanted to step in and help that young man right now. The general scrambled onto the ballista and barked for it to be readied for the assault, hauling it free from the wreckage inch by inch, only to realize the arrow he needed was buried under the same rubble. Ferris warned them the winch was busted so they couldn't haul the rope at all. Then the orc shot back, "I'll gamble my life for everyone," and Alvin couldn't just stand there and do nothing like a coward. "I didn't have the strength," but Map lunged to the orc. Then the orc stepped in and started hauling with the general, yanking that rope to load the projectile, while the men threw themselves into the plan as fast as they could. Meanwhile, the healer kept control of the spider, driving it to snag his attention, while the monster slammed shut his escape route and started pelting the enemy with stones. Then, out of nowhere, cannonballs ripped through the air and blasted the monster. When the young man spun around, he saw it. From the one surviving ship they'd rescued by baiting the beast onto the island, the orcs opened fire and threw themselves into the fight to save the people. While Leviathan was distracted, Map and Alvin fired an arrow into it, and with the beast blinded, Terrence shouted for his web. Spinning a web, he used it to sling himself across the gap, then raised the weapon in his hand, because right then it felt like the time had finally come. That secret sign the young man flashed at Funo, who'd been glued to the fight from a distance with Rio's help, lit up the battle again, and soon the animal acted like it already knew the signal. The puppy jingled his tag and guided the girl to hold tight until the signal hit, and once the heel was ready, Full swung a pickaxe to smash the cave beneath where the monster was lurking. The other spiders jumped in, and they hacked through every last thing they needed to carry out the plan they'd already agreed on. While the Leviathan couldn't move, the ground under it started to crack and crumble, because no matter how monstrous its strength was, it still couldn't withstand attacks coming at it from every side. Because it was so huge, the monster's body started to collapse, and he'd make it his mission to talk with Fertile about exactly where she had to swing a pickaxe to carve out a gap between the ground and the surface. Leviathan started dropping straight into a crushing, endless hole, and there was nothing he could do because it all happened too fast and his wounds wouldn't let him fight back. He charged to the pit's edge and told them they'd already planned for the ballista to blow up. Then the young man dug a deep, hidden cave and baited the enemy straight into the spot they'd marked. When Full got the traps supporting columns to collapse, it all played out exactly as planned. Then the young man yanked his weapon from its case, already having blanketed the cave and set up for the strike. Hill gripped Map's best work, his mithril pickaxe, and hurled those boulders up into the air. Then he'd spring sky-high to flip the machine on, and right beside him a sign blinked to life asking if he wanted to kick off the dripping process. A massive monster trapped in place spat out a fresh burst of flames at the guy, but the damage had robbed it of its old strength, so it couldn't unleash what it used to. Then the young man snapped his shield up and charged straight down at the enemy in a blur. With every ounce of strength, he bellows at the king of the cave to activate the pickaxe. Bam! The sign lights up beside it again, declaring the instructions are accepted and the dripping process kicks off. The next second, everything collided. He lunged into position and swung his pickaxe with a brutal hit, smashing right through before the monster could even brace or fight back. With every ounce of strength he had, the young man was convinced the king of the cave could help him pull off his plans and finally win, because this was his last shot to end the battle. The legendary metal that forged the pickaxe wasn't just special, it could fell gods itself, so Leviathan had no choice but to get crushed by the young man's power, unleashed at full force with that weapon. The whole guy's team went deadly still, hanging on every second, while the general's face tightened with worry because no matter how hard he'd fought with everything he had, he couldn't save the young man anymore. Rihanna, Varys, and the rest just stared as the pit's glow spilled out where Leviathan had plunged. Full lies, someone stood beside the spiders helping her carry out the second phase of the plan. She tried to back away to safety, praying the shockwave wouldn't catch her, and she re-entwined the person she held in her arms. Heel didn't have a single doubt. The pickaxe slammed straight into the enemy's body, and it just shrugged it off like it was made of iron because nothing else, no guns, no shells could ever crack it. Heel slammed the Leviathan right on its head with every ounce of strength he had, and the beast's body started to buckle, crack, and fold in on itself, telling everyone the final moment was seconds away, because those earlier wounds meant the last strike was all it took. Everyone who survived that brutal battle just froze, gaping at where the pit tore open after they struck Leviathan. Then it exploded into something even bigger when Hiriel slammed the snake with a mithril pickaxe, pure force turning the ground into a crater. Hila drove his mithril pickaxe into Leviathan, jaw clenched tight as the snake thrashed beneath him, because the moment his strike landed, the scales started snapping and popping open in rapid bursts. A sheen of sweat burst across Heel's forehead from sheer strain, his teeth clenched tighter, brows knotted as he fought to stay upright. Then he stared at Leviathan's death throes and knew with absolute certainty that his strike landed right and it was fatal. Goblins huddled at the pit's edge, cheering like they'd already won, yelling that the legendary serpent was finally beaten. Then Leviathan lurched, stopped tearing, and started dropping deeper into the pit. And when the Leviathan finally crashed, he leapt off and slashed at a rock. Then, right in that spot, he blurted that they'd pulled it off and crushed Leviathan until something snapped his senses, and the young man shot his eyes open and stared down. They thought Leviathan was finally done. Then it jerked its head up and let out a thunderous roar straight at Heel, who was hanging on for dear life on the stone, and that scream yanked him off, leaving him dangling from just one cable. The snake's roar ripped through the cave like thunder, blasting off the walls and shooting out into the open air, and everyone on the street clapped their hands over their ears just to survive the sound. Varia even blurted that it felt like a death scream. At the same time, Hilla tore himself free of the stone and dropped deeper into the cave toward the monster. Yet he didn't smash down because he'd already triggered his insurance. And as he fell, the young man opened his mouth and called out, realizing the monster's scream was bouncing through the cave even farther than before. Once the screaming finally died, Leviathan crumpled to the cave floor, gasping right as Heel stopped his fall and dangled limply from the cable above the body he'd just crushed. And the instant it happened, the whole cave started collapsing from that scream. Varys clocked it and erupted into frantic shouts that the cave was about to collapse, while General L snapped at Terran to get out of there with no delay. Then Princess Rihanna, right beside Varys, suddenly sprang into action. The girl didn't even hesitate. She sprang off the ground and hurled herself into that cave to rescue Heel from the blockage, and the goblins on the edge screamed in panic because she didn't seem to fear dying at all. She barreled into the cave, yelled for Terran, and thrust her hand out. Then the monster snapped into action, firing its web straight at the princess. Rihanna yanked onto that strand and shot like a rocket toward Gil, who was seconds from disaster. Right when she moved up beside Hyla, the princess snapped, "Grab on to me, let's get you out of this cave." Hyla clung to a single cable, head bowed, shoulders shaking as he mumbled through the pain. When he finally realizes Rihanna somehow ended up right beside him, he drags his head up and croaks, "Run, take off. Because if she doesn't, she'll get caught and possibly die right here with him." Tears of pure despair spilled over him as her words cut deep. Because she refused to let Heel die, she shouted that she would never leave him here. Rihanna knew the rubble could crush them both, but she snatched the young man up with one hand, heaved his arm over her shoulder, and started climbing out, shouting that she'd promised him she wouldn't let him down. Rihanna opened her mouth to say something else. Then the cave erupted into a collapsing roar, and a barrage of boulders came crashing down straight for Rihanna and Hyla, making them both jump in terror. At the same moment, a hulking creature caked in dust burst out of the haze and stared at Rihanna and Hyla. Rihanna's eyes went wide with shock, and Hyla, worn down by pain and exhaustion, could only knit her brows. Right when those stones were about to smash into them, the furry creature suddenly snatched both of them up and started lifting, kicking off the falling rocks with his feet as they flew, and Stun's face went pale as Rihanna blurted, "Where are you taking us?" Both men wound up riding on the wolflight's back as it thundered upward, paws striking hard and kicking off with every bound, and Rihanna clung tight to the stranger's fur so she wouldn't tumble, then blurted out, "Who are you?" Right out of nowhere, a massive boulder slammed into their path, way tougher than the rest to dodge, and everyone shrieked in panic, but the stranger snapped, "Don't be scared." Just then, another one of those creatures crawled into view. That creature thundered straight at the boulder and slammed into it head first. Boom, sending the stone shattering into rubble, and right then the first creature could haul the people out of the cave safely. The wounded man forced himself upright because Rihanna had him steady by the arm. Then he poured his gratitude onto these strangers who dragged them back from death at the last second, and demanded to know exactly who they were. One of those monsters even admitted that Heel had smashed a massive leviathan, so that basically meant heroes were hiding among them. And the two strangers who hauled them out before the rubble killed them, turns out they weren't just anyone, they were two huge kobolds. The kobolds with the white muzzle snapped to the second one and basically said, "We don't care about that healer," calling him brother. The white man swore he could smell his highness's scent up on the hill, and the young man's eyes blew wide, then shut hard like he finally understood what was coming. The first kobold snapped his head toward Hakel and Rihanna, gulped out an apology, and swore that he and his brother wanted to learn from them. Then he leaned in and asked if anyone on this island had spotted a tiny box with a small kobold inside. Right at that instant, Vales, General Alvin, and Map, desperate to find their head and the princess, burst out from behind the hill, and when General L spotted two kobolds, his jaw dropped in shock because he'd already seen them before. The kobolds spotted Alvan and Volleys barreling toward them, and the moment they arrived, the kobolds blurted that it felt like ages since they'd last seen them. They'd heard the goblin tribe had been wiped out long ago, but they never thought any would still be alive. Wallace leaned in and told Rihanna and High Cole that the two kobolds, Ash and Hay Fiend, came straight from Tiberius's tribe, and that Al Kamina had them posted to guard Leela. And the moment they heard Wallace knew their queen, the kobolds just froze in shock. Suddenly, little Lelu burst out onto the cobalt, sprinting like she had a mission while Fungal lunged after her, trying any way he could to stop her. Ash and Hane went wide-eyed as the snow-white puppy barreled toward them, and it was Lelu, their princess. When Lilu burst into that noisy crowd, Rihanna and Heel dropped to their knees to reach for her. Then the Cobalt collapsed down too, bowing to Lililla, and she just stood there, stunned. Cobalt bowed low and said they were thrilled to find their princess safe and sound. Then they spilled the truth, confessing their failure and begging her forgiveness for not being able to protect her, and swore they'd gladly trade their lives to atone for every mistake. Rena and he exchanged a gentle smile as Leela finally found her relatives, and even the little princess squeaked in confusion, tilting her head. Then General Al snapped his attention to Ash and grilled him, suspicious as all heck, about why they'd shown up. Ash stayed quiet for a moment, then blew past the silence and spilled the truth, saying it was dumb for them to keep lying. He explained the boat they'd been riding was wrecked by a leviathan, and after everything went chaos they lost the princess, so they drifted for a while. After drifting for what felt like forever on their ship's wreck, they finally got pulled to safety, rescued by the Camus pirate orcs from Corvus's horde, who hauled them onto their ship and carried them straight here. Suddenly, a goblin burst up to them and shouted at General Al that a boat was closing in on the pirate ship. Then General Al snapped his head toward his confidant and told him to hold his fire until he gave the signal. Then I'd snap around to Ash and demand what any of this is supposed to mean, because he used to swear we were fighting each other, only for Ash to stay cool and say, "We just need to run into those pirates and everything will click." He said the pirate ship that hauled them in was battered to hell, so he didn't want to stay at sea a second longer. And after their own ship got shelled, they were out of ammunition completely, meaning they'd be wrecked in a heartbeat. Ash said that's why me and Hane are begging all of you straight from us to forgive these pirates. The moment they heard it, General L snapped into frown mode. Very and Feudal went stone still with shock, and Rihanna and Hale dropped their gaze, thinking hard. When the pirates' boat finally crashed ashore, everyone was already there waiting like they'd been expecting it all along. Hyle, still leaning on Rihanna, froze in shock, stayed quiet for a beat, then finally introduced himself as Hyle, the head of this place. The long-haired pirate leaned in and told him his name was Kissimo. Then the leader of the Horde of Corvus admitted that the fight with Leviathan hit them even harder than expected, especially when they realized the inhuman island was actually being ruled by a man. Heel gaped in pure shock at Orc Camo and his crew. Those guys towered over them by several meters. Heel swallowed hard and stared at these pirates like they were giants, even for an orc, and then Camo's eyes snapped to Albii lurking behind him. Camo muttered that it was huge even for a goblin, and that's when it clicked. Albii was the leader of the Beldinclin. General L frowns, snaps, and tells everyone his name is Alvin now, then says they'll help these pirates, but the old grudges won't vanish, and he turns to the captain like, "So, are you ready to take our help?" Camu yanked his sword from its scabbard and smiled like it was no big deal, because the Belden tribe was here and this is our fate. The moment the blade flashed, the goblins snapped to attention and started drawing their own weapons. Camus slammed his sword into the ground, declared that he, Camus, the leader of the Horde of Corvus, was praying for every life of his comrades, clamped his jaw hard, and started to pull off his hat. Camo dropped to one knee, bowed so low it looked like surrender, pressed his hat to his chest, and swore that if it took saving his comrades, he'd hand over his own life. Everyone in the room snapped to shocked silence, and Capermo stepped up, owning every bit of what happened to their tribe, saying, "If you want my head, fine, but let us repair our ship first." The general nodded, shut his eyes, and declared this was the end of his reign as the orcs' leader. Then Fugal stared for a beat in disbelief, and Camo's assistant suddenly caught on, shouting that it wasn't their leader's fault. The orc peered over his captain's shoulder and barked that the traitors were behind it, not them. Then Como spun around, snapped, and told Tom to shut up. Captain Camel snapped at his subordinate, asking if he wanted to humiliate him even more. His subordinate insisted it wasn't like that, but he refused to even look at it. So now, how did Captain die? Once Captain hears about the traitors, he'll stare in shock and ask, "Wait, what?" Fed up with the bickering, General Elivan's rage flared and he roared for everyone to shut up. Rihanna and Hyle beside him clamped their hands over their ears like they couldn't take it, while Captain Kaikomo and his assistant snapped their argument to a halt. and then Cahill shot a call to Kakomo. He'll rushed to apologize to the captain for butting in, but his curiosity was driving him wild. He had to know everything. He told Kamu to give his assistant the floor. The captain didn't say a word and ground his teeth. Then his assistant realized right there that he could finally speak. He started spilling the truth. Orc Cloud wasn't just a deputy captain, he was a traitor. And right after the leader sailed off, he boldly swiped a chunk of the entire fleet. Camo's assistant swore Cloud had always been weird, and he snapped that their leader's tactics were too soft. Like the horde of Corvus still needed more glory and honor than it was getting. With sweet talk, Cloud pulled most of the captain's crew right to his side, and the captain yanked back the moment he heard the news. Too late, though. Cloud was already gone, and he'd left the horde's flags hanging all over the place. He'll finally clock it. Turns out Captain Kamo wasn't the mastermind at all. Then Captain Kamo's assistant blurts, "Nope, this is the truth. Kamo isn't behind any of this, it's someone else." Ash finally broke the silence and blurted that Leviathan had shown up smack in the middle of the fight. Then Cloud's troops got wiped out completely. Heel's brows pinched tight because it hit him in a flash. Those bodies in the water back then weren't random, they were from Cloud's army. Varys muttered that it looked exactly like it, and Ash snapped his eyes shut, saying Captain Camus was the one who pulled them out at sea. The kneeling captain's face soured the moment Al cracked that everything was pretty funny, because Captain's crew, always elbow-deep in piracy, had never gone after other factions for no reason at all. Captain Camus snapped at Alvin's words, raked the earth with his claws, then demanded to know what was wrong, and what it had changed. Teeth clenched, he hissed that he couldn't stop every single attack, and that's why he couldn't crush the rebellion Cloud sparked. He snapped, "That's on me." Then he declared he was ready to take full responsibility for everything now that he was the leader. Swallowing all that info, he clenched his jaw, dropped his gaze, and then Alvin cut in, snatching his sword and saying that if Captain Commune could still rally his orcs, then their clan house would still be standing. Alvin loomed over the kneeling captain, yanked his sword free from the scabbard, and snapped that Kamu would pay for everything with his life. Then he challenged him one last time, like he wanted to hear what else he'd say. With his eyes shut tight, Captain Camus shrugged and said it might even be funny if Elvon, the warrior of Beldhin, put him down, and the second Elvon swung his sword, the whole crowd jerked in panic, scrambling to stop the general. Foggle blurted out to her father in full panic, but Alvin's sword was already dropping, and just like that, it was too late. Everyone snapped to attention and stared at the spot in shock. Elvin swung his sword and it missed Kamu by a hair, slamming straight into the ground right in front of him as he just stared, stunned and speechless. Then Elvin snapped his head to the captain and barked, "Grab it with your hands." Grinding his teeth, Al said, straight to Elvin, the Belden tribe's general, that he was challenging Kanai, the horde of Corvus's leader, to a duel. Right before the duel even began, the two fighters clashed blades in tradition. Then they bolted to opposite sides and froze in tense stances, staring each other down like the next move would shatter everything. Everyone around them hovered on edge, eyes locked to the scene, shocked out of their minds because they never saw Ellen Camus arranging a deadly duel coming, and Hyle, draped against Rihanna's shoulder, watched it all unfold in stunned silence. He couldn't stop wondering who had the real shot at taking the other down. Alvin was terrifyingly strong as a goblin general, but with his foe being the orc leader, it looked like Elliman's strength might be outmatched. Teeth clenched through the pain, he thrusts his hand up to at least throw a shield over Alvin, because the odds are brutal, but Rihanna snaps in, intercepting him before the shield can even go up. He'll snap his head toward the girl, stunned, and call out to him with a confused edge to his voice. Rihanna won't say a word, she'll just shake her head. Then it hits him, his help is unwanted, so he cuts it out, stops trying to interfere with Al and decides to sit back and watch. Blade raised in front of him, Camus snapped around to Elvon and swore. He was ready to trade his own head for the general's tribe's blood. Camus snapped his blade up in front of his face and yelled that in their duel, General Elvin would not simply end him. The general flashed a grin and shouted that he was totally on board with those terms. Alvin snapped back that he wasn't backing down for a second, and Camus' head would drop in the blink of an eye. Seeing how both fighters locked in with that unshakable mindset, everyone nearby went even more on edge, because neither one was playing around and they swore they wouldn't back down even if it cost them their lives. After that quick exchange, both fighters snapped into battle stances, fists clamped around their blades and legs coiled to spring. Then, just seconds later, they crashed into each other with full-force attacks. At the start of the fight, Alvin hurled his battle axe straight at Captain Camus right as Camus snapped into motion and ducked, barely dodging it. Then the axe tried to fly back to Alvin until Camus slammed it away with a brutal hit. Once Ekval finally snatched his axe, you could tell fate was handing him a lucky opening. So he bolted for Alvin and smashed him on the arm, sending the axe skidding sideways before it clattered into the ground. Even with Kamiya's blow crashing in, Alvin still snapped away at the last second. Then he started to open his mouth, ready to strike in a day, while both sides moved so fast that almost nobody in the crowd even caught what just happened. With only one battle axe left, Alvin's seriousness sharpened into a blade. He raised a second battle axe in front of him, ready to smash into the next attack. Right then, Camus lunged back in with his sword, muttering that nobody had ever dodged it like that before. Then he struck again, and Alvin barely slipped away, but the blade still kissed his cheek, and Rihanna's breath caught in pure astonishment. She gushed that Captain Camus moved so fast his attacks were almost impossible to read. And then someone blurted out that Mr. Camus was insanely strong. Outfuel, stuck on the sidelines, couldn't stop herself. She watched her father fight to the death, squeezing her fists so hard they ached as she pressed them to her chest. And right then her father yanked the rope to haul the second axe back in. That axe was right on Captain Camus's heels. And at that exact moment, the observers snapped into stunned silence when they finally understood Alvin's play. They set it all up so the axe would slam into the stone from behind, and he snapped that it was downright cruel. But the axe was already crashing in, so Camus spun around to fend it off, and then I took my opening and struck him back. But he got yanked back in a shock. Captain Camus had intercepted the axe mid-flight, swatted it over his shoulder toward Alvin, and somehow Alvin blinked his eyes open again in the blink of a day. Sword again, Camus lunged at him and screamed at Alvin, "Pick what you'll block!" Because he could only stop one strike in the end, and now the general had to choose, his axe or the captain's sword. Alvin ducked under the axe and launched into a sword strike. Every single person in the room went wide-eyed and gasped in pure shock. Blood splashed across the ground and Camus froze in stunned disbelief, unable to grasp what was unfolding. The captain's sword jabbed straight through only Alvin's arm. Then the general yanked Camus' arm with his injured hand and barked that Camus had walked right into his trap. Alvin squeezed the orc's hand till it screamed, warning that now he wouldn't be able to swing his sword worth a damn. Then he croaked at the captain to surrender, only for him to suddenly clamp down on the other hand too. Camus towered over Alvin, scanning to figure out what species he really was, so the goblin had to dig in and push even harder. And Camus snapped that it wasn't him who got caught at all, it was Alvin, who baited the trap just to catch him. Under the strain, Alvin's legs slammed into the ground and ripped its surface apart. Camus piled on with his full weight and growled that Alvin couldn't let his condition trick him, because Camus was an orc and he'd never, ever get beaten by some goblin in a fight. You piled on the pressure until Alvin grit his teeth, and the captain snapped that he'd shatter his opponent's arms. Almost everyone in the audience gasped and leaned in, each person desperate for their own side, while Alvin Grind stared down Camus and told him to keep his jokes to himself. He cinched his grip on his opponent's hands and snapped that his words only held for ordinary goblins. Because he wasn't fighting them, he was going toe-to-toe with Alban, the goblin general, and then a mark suddenly flared on his body. The captain's throat rumbled as he clashed with the Belden tribe's mightiest warrior. Then the goblin screamed, thrust both hands up, and Camus jerked into the air too. Alvin launched him skyward and the orc gasped in pure amazement. Stuck in that weird limbo, Camus blurted out in shock how Alvin pulled this off. But before the question could land, the general snapped his hand up, clamped Camus' head, growled, and flipped in midair until he ended up hovering straight over him. Everything hits so fast the audience can barely even process it. Then the captain's head smacks into the stone, because Alvin yanked the captain's head and drove it down with every ounce of his weight, and right after that he snaps the captain's saber in two. With their general finally victorious, the goblins erupted in cheers. Then they sprinted toward Alvan, practically vibrating with excitement, shouting, "Is Camus dead?" Alvan sat right there on the ground, grinning like he'd seen it coming, and said it wouldn't be that simple to take down the orc's leader. As his senses finally clawed back, he coughed up blood and rasped that he'd lost to the captain. Eyes still shut, he accepted his fate and ordered General Elvin to finish him. Then Elvin sprang to his feet and snatched an axe. He said everything was fine now because ever since he won, Captain Camus' life was his to claim. Alvin blurted that he wouldn't waste a single second of it, not for nothing. And when Camus heard that, his eyes snapped wide with pure shock. With Alvin's eyes finally locked on him, the axe rose high and he crowed the duel was finished, then bragged that his clan had crushed Corvus and won the war. Every last goblin in Alvin erupted with joy, screaming so loud the whole island shook, and Alvin hauled himself up to the wounded Hill, scratching the back of his head as he apologized to the Hill for acting that way. Hill didn't snap at him, she just grinned, saying this was exactly the kind of move Alvin would have made. Then once he was done, he'd thank Alvin for everything, and the general smiled back. Rihanna dragged Heel right up to the downed Kamu. Then Heel snapped his gaze to the captain and declared he'd stay on this island until his ship was as good as new. But when he said the ship would be repaired by then, Kai insisted there'd be a way for people to get inside, and he demanded to know if the captain would actually go along, only to make the captain and his assistant stare at the kid in pure shock. Head bowed, Kamu declared he'd take the Heel's offer, then stepped away from his beaten opponent, only to freeze when Alvin spotted his own daughter nearby with her head down, staring at him as she quietly turned. Then she exploded into action and slammed her father's leg with everything she had. He yelped in pain and jumped back hard. Alvin froze, stunned, and blurted out, "Why would you hit me like that?" She didn't answer a word. She leaned against her father and dropped her head, then let out a heavy sigh and told Alvin once again to stop getting so hot. But of course he still refused to listen. Right then, Captain Kamu snapped back to his feet, blasted out a command, and pointed straight at Heel, who sat on a rock, then roared to his men to hear him loud and clear. As long as they were here, they'd follow Heel's orders. The whole army of warriors swarmed Hill the instant he arrived, roaring greetings like a storm. And that's exactly how those hundreds of Corvus Horde soldiers turned into guests of the island's people, even as it left Hill quietly nervous. Ash and Haney didn't just tag along, they obeyed their queen and barreled into Lilal, ready to become the foster parents of baby Lilal. Ash said it looked like the Belden tribe really had taken over Hill's command after all, so he grinned and told everyone, "Fine, I'll rename you because now you work for me." The young man nodded, claiming the payoff for this deal would come straight from his own label, so he had no clue what would happen once the name finally changed. Hill blurted out that all he wants is to shield Leela, then he snapped that Ash was officially Ashton and Hayne was now Haynes, and the two kobolds immediately bowed low, swearing on their lives. Right after that, he let out a heavy sigh and admitted that Vols was swamped, and Very just nodded with a grin, because he'd been tending the wounded and setting up fresh places for the guests to stay. Then out of nowhere, a sharp burst of pain hit him and he froze with a sudden shudder. Rihanna shot up to him, buzzing with excitement, while the young man slowly crumpled onto the stone and clutched his head, letting out a heavy sigh as he tried to reassure her that he was okay. He was just worn out. Rihanna didn't listen to his beliefs for a second. She grabbed his forehead and snapped, "You've got a fever." Rihanna wheeled on Valis and demanded that he take her to the room, then make sure her hands to help kicks in for him afterward. The goblin nodded hard and bragged that the girl could count on him. Exhausted, Heel spun toward Rihanna and demanded why she was standing there, claiming he was fine. Rihanna snapped back, all annoyed that he'd pushed himself way too hard. Suddenly, she lunged in, wrapped her arms around the stunned kid and blurted out an apology, only for him to snap back, totally confused, asking what she was doing. Then Rihanna scooped him up like he weighed nothing and carried him straight to the room so he could rest. He'll shoot the girl a furious question about what she was doing and she'll insist everything's fine and that she can carry him. Then he'll snap that he wasn't asking about any of that, while Captain Kamu, watching the whole scene, breaks into a giggle and covers his mouth with his hand. After that incident, he handed over all his command to Valus, then let his crew treat and rest him until his condition finally settled back to normal. Meanwhile, the goblins plunged into the cave where Hill's Leviathan had crushed their snake, and when they stared at the dead body, they erupted in awe because that beast was absolutely massive. One of the goblins snapped his head to Valius and offered to just bury this Leviathan like it was nothing. Then suddenly, Map strode up to the snake and sliced off a chunk with care, and everyone froze as they watched Map chow down with pure, delighted hunger. After he chewed that bite, Map bounced around, grinning like he'd hit jackpot, then snatched the next piece. The goblins clocked that Tom was absolutely in love with Levy Fan's meaty center, and Veals muttered to himself, then beckoned for Homer's 10 and 11. After that, they started freezing the cave hard, locking away everything so the Leviathan wouldn't spoil it, because even they couldn't believe the snake's meat might be edible until Map finally took a taste. Once they were done, the goblins stormed over to a massive pillar in the sea and tried hauling it out. Then, out of nowhere, a voice shouted and the goblins snapped around. Captain Cam's crew stepped in and offered their help because they had boats and they sailed like real pirates. The island's goblins didn't argue at all and they told the orcs to tie up the golem. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he wanted the Belden tribe and Corvus's horde to bury the old grudges and finally live side by side in peace. Turns out the Galem's core survived thanks to Orichockum, so the sighted could recover, but he'd still have to repair his body himself, and first he needed to handle his own mess. Rihanna sat right beside him, smiling as she offered him something. Heel lifted his hand and mumbled that he was totally fine, so he should eat on his own. Rihanna snapped right back that he'd missed the point. If he didn't rest hard, he wouldn't recover. Rihanna pressed a spoonful of food into his hands and ordered him to open up, so in the end, he couldn't argue, bit down obediently and finished every last bite, realizing too late that Rihanna's stubborn streak was way tougher than it looked at first. Even with everything that happened, Heel couldn't help but be insanely grateful to her for taking such good care of him, and the medicines Veils brewed for him from Yggdrasil leaves hit fast. Working so well he started recovering right away. He'll grin at Rihanna, tell her she doesn't have to push herself like this, because just a little more and he'll finally have enough mana to bounce back and recover. She flashed a real smile and told him straight up she hadn't been forcing herself to care for him all day, because she knew she'd never get a moment like this again. Rihanna spun away, mortified, and started twirling a strand of hair around her finger, insisting it wasn't hard for her to heal, and that she didn't see him nearly often enough. Just as the girl finished feeding him and started to leave, he blurted out that he finally understood it wasn't hard for her at all. And the moment it hit him, he couldn't ignore how awkward it felt to sit back and rest while everyone else was working. The young man stared at the wall where his pickaxe hung, and you could tell he was itching to keep digging. Meanwhile, the goblins slipped into the cave and started digging, and one of them hissed that the place felt way too hot. Then he swung his pickaxe to drive the point home. His buddy only nodded. "Yeah, it's real." The moment the pick hit the stone, water burst out and splashed the goblins. He lunged aside, stunned, and so did they, because neither of them expected water to be right here. Then one of the goblins blurted out that this was a real hot spring. Some time ago, Heel was hauled off to a god on a mission in Ireland, where he saved a sinking ship, then tore into a brutal monster, Leviathan. He finally understood what real friendship costs, but now he was staring down the biggest enemy he'd ever met, and beating it felt almost impossible. Rihanna snapped her voice in the cave, calling out to Hyla, and the young man shot back at once, asking what was wrong with shaking excitement. Rihanna told him that this hot spring was unbelievably good, and the stammering guy quickly agreed. Then he blurted out. As they stretched and waded through the heat, Rihanna admitted her tribe had the same hot spring and she washed here every single day. She even boldly said she loved it. The poor embarrassed Hillman spun away, then mumbled that he got it. He nearly vanished underwater just to avoid seeing Rihanna, then his mind spiraled over how it all even started. Because it began a week ago. He was sick of being stuck in bed all day, so he grabbed a pickaxe and started practicing, then swung hard, took a breath and felt it. Everything was fine. Suddenly, the room's door blasted open right as he was about to swing a pickaxe, but a savage hit tore into his side, and he crumpled and screamed in agony as every visitor froze, staring in stunned silence on the threshold. Rihanna hauled Hyle back onto the bed and made him sit, then pinned him down and snapped that she'd already told him to stay on bedrest for now, leaving him to awkwardly apologize to the girl. Captain Kamu shot a nasty look at the heel and snapped, asking if he'd ever been taught not to offend girls. Then the young man finally caught on. Rihanna hadn't come alone and he could only stare, shocked because it was downright rare to see the captain show up here. Captain Camus tipped off his hat and told Hill he was only passing through and decided to drop by, saying Rihanna was just giving him a tour of the island, while the Cobalt crew stood right there beside them. Come, he leaned close to Rihanna and whispered that she couldn't forget it, and the second the girl understood, she shoved it into his hands, and when he took it, he instantly knew exactly what it was. He straightened everything out and blurted, "It's my clothes!" Then he couldn't help grinning because even worn out as they were, they still looked brand new. Beaming at him, Rihanna told him these clothes were stitched back together with spider threads, better than ever, and as he kept examining them, he happily thanked her. After that, Ashton finally cracked and started talking. Turns out this island is packed with wild surprises. Kobold told them, "Sure, this island looks small on the map, but under our feet there's a whole maze of tunnels and the blacksmithing here is top-notch." Then Captain Camus snapped back, "I've been everywhere, but I've never laid eyes on Yggdrasil." Sinking onto the edge of the bed, he told the captain he could turn this place into something even better to live in, so he'd gladly take any suggestions or comments, and the captain agreed to help, saying the Horde of Corvus would do everything in their power. He blurts out that he and his people would be thrilled if he'll accept them as residents of this island, and the moment he says it, the young man's eyes go wide with shock. He'll go to the captain and his people and apologize for the Belden tribe's harsh treatment. But even though the young man insists it was Camus' fault, reconciliation won't come easy and it'll take a long, long time. Kill told him he'd gladly take Camia in and brushed off his worries. After all, the whole Belden tribe answers to him, a single man. The young one even figured the goblins would soon shove their grudges aside, and Camus thanked him. Suddenly, the captain snapped. How in the world did the island's ruler, this gentle man who even treated monsters kindly, build a dominion like this? Hill fidgeted with a lock of his hair and mumbled that this was a pretty long tale. Then the young man chimed in, saying he'd come all the way from San Fales and that this island was part of the kingdom. Captain Camus couldn't stop wondering where that hill came from, and he was about to ask, until a stranger came sprinting in, shouting that they were in big trouble. It was Ree, gasping for breath after a sprint, who slapped her palm against the wall to steady herself. Then he snapped awake, alert as a guard dog, and demanded what was wrong. The excited girl burst out, saying their hot water was spurting right out of the ground. After that, Hilp packed up and followed the others down to the cave, right where Ree had promised there'd be hot water. They spotted a tiny pond, steam curling off the surface, and Hilprian gasped in pure awe. Valus snapped his head toward Hill and asked how he was really feeling. Hill grinned and said he felt great, he could walk on his own now, and he just had to come see this amazing sight. General L leaned over the young man's shoulder and burst out, grinning, "A hot spring, this is one I'm already hooked on." The goblin lit up too, his excitement spilling over as he clenched his fist. Little shot a sulky look at her father, planted her hands on her hips, and snapped that he was way too optimistic. Then she insisted it might just be a cave flood, not some endless supply. The goblins insisted they were only digging here, and then, bam, water burst out of the ground and kept gushing non-stop. He'll ask if they'd ever seen this before. Ree, still refusing to believe it's an endless water supply, will say it's happened before too, only back then there wasn't nearly this much water, so he'll decide the first thing to do is make sure this water won't hurt them. Right out of nowhere, splash! Water exploded everywhere and Map didn't even hesitate. He dove in and started scrubbing himself like a pro, while Alex fumed that it wasn't fair, because he'd checked the water first before he even got there. The young man dropped into a squat by the water, flipped open his map and fired off a question. "Tell me, is there a way to get this water out?" Valus mumbled to himself and said it might work if they had this source up in the mountains, but trying it from underground was brutally hard. Hill slumped and agreed, saying it really would be tough. Then Maps popped up with a solution on the spot. He'd convinced himself he had it all figured out until Map yanked everything together, bolted to his forge, and turned his plan to drain the water into chaos. Then the inspired Map sketched a clear plan right in the dirt. Once he stared at it, he understood. The Map wanted him to use the workshops to forge molds out of stone and iron. Captain Camus' kobolds gawked in stunned silence as Heel started messing with an entire mountain of iron straight up like it was nothing. The captain snapped, shocked, asking what the heck was happening, and Heel just shrugged it off. its routine inventory. Then the goblins melted the iron down, poured it with eerie precision into molds, and everyone bustled like a factory, churning out iron pipes from stone molds, while Map raced to upgrade the hands of numbers 8 and 9. Heel let out a shaky sigh and grinned, saying it felt just like fire magic, until a blazing ray burst from the upgraded arm, and as the young man watched, it snapped through the pipes and melted them clean. So they launched a massive project, dragging hot water straight from the cave up to the surface, and every single person threw themselves into it. Map and the crew engineered a high-tech system to run the water supply and stop every drop from being wasted. Then they even slapped a massive swimming pool on the surface so they wouldn't have to go back down. But Hybel still wanted to do something good and help everyone, yet Rihanna never took her eyes off him, until she saw him grab a pickaxe and that creepy smile spread across her face, and the young man immediately decided his life was worth more than the job. A week later, they finally hauled the hot spring up to the surface. When Heel saw it, his eyes lit up and he couldn't stop admiring how enormous the pool was. Com nodded along, scratched his chin, and then straight up asked where the water was supposed to be coming from. While everyone huddled around the bathhouse that was still totally empty, Valleys leaned in and shouted at Map, who was slumping and wiping sweat off his forehead after all that brutal work. The hidden water pressure device roared to life on the wind of Golem number 10. Then, when Valus gave the order, Map snapped his signal to another goblin, and it started cranking the wheel that drove the whole mechanism. Right after that, the statue in the bathhouse, looking just like Map, suddenly cracked open its mouth. Everyone who'd gathered went dead silent, staring at it like their breath might get stuck. Then Map bolted straight toward the statue where the gurgling was coming from. Rushing up behind her, Mappa slammed the statue's back with everything he had. Then, right on cue, its mouth blasted a roaring fountain of scorching hot water. Everyone burst into cheers on the spot. Then he clenched his fist, shouted that the Map had nailed it, and in a low voice admitted the statue's design just wasn't that great. Resat on the pool's edge and sighed, soaking it in as he stared down. The girl watched the water surge higher and faster, and General Elvin leaned in beside his daughter, blurting that he could already barely wait to dive into it. Captain Kamu stood right behind him, grinned, and waved his hand, declaring that Alvin would get the right to plunge into the water first, and that the Belden tribe deserved it too, but he didn't have time to say more. Alvarn's outrage erupted the second Camia spoke. Then he shoved him straight into the water before Camia could even blink. Once in the water, the captain snapped in anger at Alvin. "What are you doing?" But Alvin didn't even look up, ignoring him completely as he cheered his comrades on, urging them to enjoy the hot spring. Then Alvin smirked and told them to wash up first because they shouldn't end up like that poor orc who tumbled into the water, only for Kamu to blow up again, insisting, "I didn't fall," while admitting Alvin had kicked him. Once everyone finally washed ashore, the joyful goblins and orcs dove straight into scorching hot water, with the adults getting dumped with steaming splashes while the kids grinned and leapt into the pool from a running start. Alvin slumped back against the rocks, letting out a satisfied sigh that this felt amazing, and Camus, right there beside him, nodded like, "Yeah, this water could wipe out exhaustion," thanking Valestant Camus for his help. Staring at the captain who doesn't so much as blink at Wallace's praise, Alvin shoots a question to Camus like, "Something's off, or does he just hate being praised?" The general's theory hits next. All of this is nothing but the grind of muscular orcs. Kamu glares at the general, snaps that Alvin is disrespecting the captain with his words, and one of the assistants quickly turns to Alvin to mutter, awkwardly, that he never should have brought up their leader's muscles. Right then, Captain Camus rockets onto a rock, strikes a proud pose, and yells for everyone to worship his beautiful body, while the kobold rushes in and tells Leela to ignore them. Heel grabbed a towel and hauled a wooden basin with him since he was going to swim, and when he saw the whole crowd packed into the pool, he grinned like the day was about to be pure fun, while Seal, as always, rode right beside his master. The young man whipped around to his pet and asked if it wanted to swim with them too, while Alvin yelled for Fundle not to swim in the bathroom. She promised she wouldn't, and he flinched the instant he realized something. He snapped his eyes to the pool, and there was Fudgel, staring back as she said she felt the healer had arrived there before anyone else. Then the young man blinked, realizing the pool wasn't separated, so monsters with both sexes were soaking together. As Map was splashing in the water, a dark stain suddenly spread around him and the goblins nearby froze and demanded what was happening. Killenly, Varys tell me why the baths weren't separated, but he just stared, clearly clueless about what the young man meant. Heel sighed heavy and thought Varys totally missed his question. Then, soft footsteps crunched on the stone behind the young man. Someone called out his name and snapped him upright. It was Rihanna. She was heading for a dip in the hot springs, two towel and ladle in hand, and she said she wanted to scrub the back of the chair. The young man went stiff, like lightning hit him, and he just stared with his mouth hanging open. One side of Hyla told him he could totally splash around with Rihanna since the baths weren't separated, while the other side insisted he had to share them too, but either way, he could seize the moment because that chance was right there. He'll bicker with himself for a bit, then boom, both sides finally snap into agreement and they decide he'll swim with Rihanna. Rage flared in the young man's chest as ugly thoughts stormed through his head, but he just brushed them off with a sharp wave. Panic hit him and he bolted out of the pool, yelling to Rihanna that he felt dizzy, then promised he'd come back later to swim, wishing everyone a great time before he vanished, while Rihanna just stared after him, totally lost. He whipped his head toward her and snapped that Rihanna totally spooked him, and then he told the kid that their pet could hit the baths with someone else because he himself really didn't feel like swimming there. He rubbed the back of his head and confessed that, yeah, he wanted to swim too, until he realized it might feel like he was bullying Rihanna. After mulling it over for ages, he finally snaps. He's diving into that cave and swimming solo with only a seal chilling in the hot spring to keep him company. When he hit the spring, he dipped one foot in, then plunged all the way under. He sank down, leaned his back against a stone, and declared the water was perfect. Right then, Seal also sprang into the hot water. The young man shot a glance back at the water-supplying machine they built for the outside, stunned, and said he never imagined they'd pull off something like this. Then he declared that Mappa was a total genius and praised number 10 for doing an amazing job. Suddenly, Rihanna popped up behind him and he already knew. She said the young man would be here, and before he could even react, he jolted, toppled, and smacked face first into the water. Redness flooded his face as he spun toward Rihanna, mortified, and blurted out what she was doing here. Then she smiled and admitted she just couldn't stand to stay away from him. Rihanna flashed him a smile and apologized for what everyone was doing, saying they were loud and jittery only because they hadn't seen the hot spring in ages. Then she added that she'd already clocked how badly he wanted to soak it all in silence. A little while later, Rihanna sidled up to Heel and asked with a bright smile if she could bother his calm and join him at the spring. Before long, the girl was already sinking into steaming hot water, Heels red with embarrassment as she turned away, head to toe burning. He'd just run into the biggest enemy he'd ever faced. He met the enemy head-on, then Rihanna suddenly snapped her hand to the side and shouted for him to heal, so he spun around in shock, and she told him the ore glimmered like stars across the night sky. So he forces himself to calm down, yanks open his inventory and starts scanning every item. Then after poring over it all, he realizes they blew way too much iron making those pipes. Rihanna suddenly dropped her gaze and murmured to Heikel, yanking him out of his headspace. Then she blurted that she had something huge to tell him, and the moment those words hit, Heel's fear spiked as his nerves went rigid. The young man felt her words were way too suspicious. Rihanna was telling him something important when they were alone, then his mind latched onto the technical side and that seal on number 10, and panic hit him hard. Rihanna tried to blurt something out, but her words tangled in her own hesitation, stuttering like she couldn't catch her breath, until she finally snapped that she didn't understand the feelings of the goblins in her tribe. She rushed up to Hill, apologized with a shaking voice, and swore she understood Captain Kamu and the rest were truly sorry for what went down earlier. But no matter what, her clan's home would always live in their hearts and there was nothing left they could do. The girl flashed a smile and said, "From now on we work together, eat together, and soak in these hot springs together." And even with all their old fights hanging in the air, Soriano's heart leapt. He bowed his head and grinned right back. He told the girl to drop the apology, some memories just don't want to be left behind. Then he leaned in and said he'd love to see her push her tribe even further. The young man already knew the answer was a yes, so he blurted, "Good," and told Rihanna to stare at the island: goblins, slugs, cave spiders, more goblins, kobolds, and two people living together. Right after she spoke, Rina flashed a warm smile and shoved her back against the young man's back, so hard his eyes snapped wide awake. Then she bowed and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. The young man jerked up and blushed harder than before, ready to ask what she was doing, then stopped dead, because when he finally looked, the girl was already asleep against his back. He stared at the sleeping girl in shock, then it hit him: Rihanna had burned through a ton of mana, but still she kept grinding like nothing could stop her. He tore his gaze away from Rihanna and stared ahead, then tilted his head to the cave ceiling and mouthed a thank you to her, because she never even noticed what he felt. Suddenly, the girl blinked awake, lurched up, and blurted an apology to Hill. She'd fainted. Hill jerked back in shock, snatched seal, and the girl's heel was trapped in the spring until it got boiled. After a while, maybe the hot spring had something to do with it. Hill didn't care about the why. He'd recovered, and now he was back on his feet, ready to work. The young man swung the pickaxe, and shockingly, pain never hit his body. Tears of joy flooded his face because at last he could dig. Rihanna and Fungal stood by the door, grinning, but Fungal still couldn't wrap his head around it. How on earth could a heel cry over this? Captain Camus strode into the house and toasted Heel's recovery, and when the young man turned with a salute, he smiled and waved at the captain before shooting a wink toward Hill, then asked, with one pointed finger over his shoulder, if Hill could spare him an extra minute. When they stepped outside, Camus stared at the sprawling view from the hill and blurted, full of awe, that this place was breathtaking. Camus whipped around to Hill and shoved the list into his hands, saying it was a gift for the young man to celebrate his recovery. Then the young man took it, stared in shock, unrolled the scroll, and realized in an instant that Porty's been pulling the strings this whole time. He leaned in and demanded to know if Camus made the list himself, and the captain puffed up proudly, saying he built the whole plan on Wallace's orders. Then he pressed, "Can we even build a port on this land?" And Camus nodded, laying out exactly how it could be done. The captain said he'd heard it too, that Heel was planning to trade with the outside world someday, but the young man just stared back because he didn't have any ships at all. Heel snapped back, pissed off. "We already smashed every ship that washed in and turned it into planks." After that, Captain Camus snapped his arm toward his ship anchored near the island and declared they were ready to hand it over to Hill, so the young man froze, shocked, and demanded, "Is that really true?" The captain doubled down on his promise. He'd give the ship back, but Leviathan had smashed the bottom, so they'd have to repair it first, and that was just one more reason they needed a proper port. He's going to ask what that triangle on the port's plan was supposed to mean. Camus will admit he got a bit carried away, and that's why he went and tweaked the port plan. Then, in true royal fashion, he stamped that triangle on everything that couldn't be built. The young man weighed the plan, hand on his chin as he thought hard, then said it. "This port design is basically as good as a real royal port." You could tell he already knew exactly what the royal raft looked like, so he leaned in and asked if the young man was from the kingdom. Then he gave a tight little smile and confirmed the captain's guess. Hill claims he's the 17th prince of the kingdom of San Fales, but he was such a total loser they threw him out. Then once he spilled everything to Rihanna, she finally opened up about her past, and Camus even apologized for the question. The young man shot his hand up right away, cutting off the captain before he could think there was anything extra to say, then blurted that this island was basically abandoned in everyone's eyes, so the kingdom wouldn't even bother looking and there was nothing for him to worry about. Snapping his gaze away from the captain, he'll grin and thank him for the gift, then tell him he's off to talk the next moves through with the Valeson map. Can you agree with that? The captain watched Hill walk away in silence, and Hill could feel that Camus wasn't too thrilled with his design. Then they got to work. He powered up and started laying the bricks with his abilities, brick by brick. The captain stormed in, stared at the young man's work with his mouth hanging open in pure awe. Alvin clapped him on the shoulder and burst into laughter, then proudly declared that their leader was unbelievably strong. While he kept staring, he finally started hauling those massive bricks, and Camus blurted out, "How in the world is the king of the caves Mark even doing that?" After a while, just about everything was finally done. Captain Camus stared at the young man's work and burst out that it was incredible. praising how Hill had built a truly amazing harbor. Heel snapped his gaze to the captain and said he could only set the port's foundation. Then he asked, bold as brass, if Captain Kamiya could take the reins from there. A stunned finger shot at himself as he couldn't even believe it. Heel just offered him control of the port. Vols barked to himself behind Camus' back that everything would be fine and that he'd make it. Rihanna flashed the captain a warm smile and wished him luck while Alvin shot a disgusted look. The captain spun around, shocked to see them staring. Then he spun back to Hyle, drove his fist into Hyle's chest and shouted that he'd back the young man's proposal. Hyle could count on him. He then erupted with the promise he would build this stunning port. Heel grinned and promised those beautiful goons would be the captain's help. Then he slid the count back from the first all the way to the 7th. After Leviathan had smashed it to pieces, he couldn't stop himself from yelling, "Good to see you guys," and pushed them into action. There was still plenty of stone to build the port, so he decided to dive into the cave and start digging. Then, while he dug, Fungal crept up behind him. She burst out laughing that Heel finally crawled back to the caves, then demanded why the young man wasn't swinging a mithril pickaxe, just a regular one. Heel figured it didn't matter anymore since he already had plenty of ordinary tools. Suddenly, someone shouted that Leo was in real danger here, and they warned him not to go any farther. It was Ashton and Haynes, stuck with one main job watching over little Lilu, and when Hill finally stumbled out an awkward apology, he begged Ashton to take Lila away from there. After that, Fugel planted himself beside Haynes, and Haynes, still smiling, figured he'd stick around and asked if Fugel would dig with him right now. The Cobalt grabbed a pickaxe and blurted that he wanted to try digging. Then the girl burst into laughter and asked Haynes what kind of pickaxe he should use instead of a sword, and Hill standing right there yelled for Fugel to calm down a bit. Then the young man spun toward Ashton, standing right behind him, eyes on everything, and begged him not to take Fugel to heart because she's still just a kid. Right then, Fungal was training Haynes right in front of Cobalt, who blurted out a question about how to smash with a pickaxe. Haynes gasped, "That's it, exactly like that," and she jabbed a finger toward the glowing spots behind the rock, saying those lights meant there was something waiting there. He'll stare at the Cobalt's work from the side, stunned like it hit him out of nowhere. Haynes looked ridiculously powerful and charged ahead until he reached the end in no time. Then Fungal snapped and decided to outdig Cobalt, how much ore they could pull up. They dug so ferociously that boulders blasted through the air in every direction. He'll grin to himself, hoist a pickaxe onto his shoulder and step out ready, because right now he finally gets to do what he loves most, digging in the mines. While the second kobold was tangled up with his work, Lilu sprang onto Ashtan's shoulder, and as the kobold hurriedly apologized to Hill, he insisted he had to get back to his job. Then Lilu suddenly spotted something, leapt to the ground, and started barking at a pile of stone. Haynes and Fowley lounged in a heap of rocks left behind from their grind, while Cobalt let out a smug laugh, insisting that digging was way more exciting than he ever imagined. Fowley nodded hard and blurted that this place always had oars to spare. Suddenly, Haynes, pickaxe in hand and dirt on his boots, yanked something free and yelled for Heel, shouting that he and Liliu had found something, and the whole group shot upright and stared straight at where he was pointing. From the far end of the cave, Haynes burst out that he had no idea what it was. Then Foucault shot up from her seat and yelled at Leal that she didn't have to go anywhere near that place. Haynes and Leela uncovered some bizarre, gibberish device, and he swore it was a chamber or a chalcom chest. But Leela snapped back that it had to be a coffin, not a chest, and Haynes just sank into gloom because this definitely wasn't good. He stared at his own feet and spotted a weird-shaped stone sitting there, and when the Cobalt scooped it up in its paws, it told him those rocks had spilled out of that device. So he shot out an excited, "This is something new," and demanded Haynes hand it to him. The system pinpointed it. This weird little hill stone was a transfer stone, and the moment you tapped it, it snapped asterisk to other transfer stones instantly, with the travel distance changing based on the stone's size. He stared hard at the transfer stone, rubbing his chin as if the answer might bite him, then demanded how it could fling him to another place, until he suddenly shouted for Hela because she'd uncovered something big. She stared at the device they'd just dug up and then spotted a weird little stone-like spot on it, right in Heel's hands, and the girl immediately suggested they pop that stone into the hole. Heel nodded, obeyed the girl, and slid the transfer stone into the slot, snug as a glove, and then it erupted with light, leaving everyone there gaping in total shock. So yeah, nothing bad happened at all. The only thing that changed was the stone's insertion device flickered to life and lit up like it had activated. Staring at the glowing floor of the capsule, the girl demanded to know where it goes, and Ashton snapped back that he wouldn't tell them to try it themselves, even if this capsule truly jumps them to another stone. After that, the whole crew spun around and turned their backs on the capsule, then started buzzing about the find. Fully scratched her head and pitched sending a Gallum in, and Haynes agreed, until he warned that Gallums might not even work there and they still never once noticed the map. He turned back toward the capsule and said they needed to think harder about what to do next. And that's exactly when the young man spun around right as Matt scooted to another spot using the capsule, so everyone gasped and went into shock. After he saw that map vanished, he didn't waste a second. He tore toward the transfer capsule, shouting that he was chasing Map and ordering everyone to stay put. Haynes barreled after him, yelling that Hill better not do this. Just when it seemed calm again, that stone flared to life. Then every person gathered here, all set to rush in and save Map, got hit by lightning. So they all got dumped into a brand new place they didn't recognize, and everyone stared around with hard frowns, demanding to know where they were. Then he muttered that he had no idea, spun to Alila and asked if she knew where Map was, but she didn't have a clue either. He sprinted back to the capsule, climbed inside, then peered over his shoulder and told Seal, "I'll check everything first, doesn't look dangerous." After that, he ordered Seal to call Valis. As he guided her to the capsule, Lulu darted after him and leapt in too, barking like a happy hype man, and Full came sprinting after them, yelling that she was going along too to hunt down the map. Then two massive kobolds stomped up to them, acting as Princess Lilu's guards, because protecting her wasn't optional. Fungal tried shouting for them to hold up, because none of them were ever going to fit in the capsule. But it was already too late. Ashton, pinched tight, pushed Haynes to chase them down, and Haynes immediately nodded and went along. He tried to back out of the capsule, but it jammed him in place. Lilo snapped in indignation, and Fugal shouted that she was pinned down, while Hill scrambled to calm Leela as her outrage blared at full volume. Then, out of nowhere, their capsule suddenly came to life. The second they were yanked into a totally different world, everyone spilled out of the transfer capsule, thuds and shock-filled cries everywhere. Then he slammed onto the floor like he'd been hit by a truck, and Lilu somehow landed right on his head and burst into frantic barking. He looked up and froze. This wasn't just any room, it was a massive hall packed to the ceiling with bookcases, and as the young man pushed himself up, he sucked in a sharp breath, amazed like he'd never, ever seen anything like it before. Fungal marched up to the bookcase and studied it closely, and the girl chimed in about all the books here, then pushed for the key question. Were they actually on the island? He'll peer over the fence, swallow hard, then admit he thinks they're on an island since it looks just like the spot where he found those golems. After that, the young man stared at the library's endless floors and said it was downright terrifying. Haynes scanned the area, then snapped his attention to Hill and told him he'd finally found the map they came for, while Cobbled chimed in that Mappa was in trouble and needed help. The second Hill heard that, his face turned deadly serious and he ordered Haynes to take him to Mappa. Cobalt swept the young man past a bunch of bookcases and he'd instantly clock the damage. Those shelves were trashed, with books scattered across the floor. Then Haynes shoved him toward the map and he looked down and realized he'd collapsed on the ground in a spreading pool of blood. He sprinted straight to the map, grabbed him and shook him hard, shouting what happened and who did it. Then flipped the map over and froze because he was bleeding from the nose. When he glanced down, he spotted a book with pictures of women sprawled on the floor. Heat rushed to the young man's face. He blushed hard, snapped the book shut and muttered that he just needed to forget it, then closed it and started working on the map right away. Map finally snapped back to himself, dropped to the floor and scratched his head. Then he turned and told them they had to head back because everyone was worried sick about him. The moment he said it, Map shot to his feet and started scanning the area like something was coming. Map lowered his gaze and spotted a book on the floor packed with ancient symbols, so he snatched it up, stared at the strange markings, called the caveman over to follow him, and then, Without a second thought, he hurled the book straight back down. He spun around and saw that Seal was back, dragging a whole crowd of helpers behind him, and the young man blurted in shock, asking the pet if it really brought everyone. While all that chaos was happening, Vols spotted a book, snatched it up, and shouted for Heel, saying this was an amazing, truly wonderful find. He strode up to the goblin and leaned over the book he'd found, and when he read a little, Vols muttered, crushed, that he didn't have a clue what language it was written in. Then he growled that he couldn't read it either. Suddenly, Captain Cam appeared right behind him, and with joy blazing in his eyes, he clenched his fist and shouted that this adventure was insanely exciting. The captain was absolutely thrilled with everything, especially the teleportation device they used, the massive library, and the buried remains of a civilization nobody could name. So Camia walked away from this adventure with pure, glowing satisfaction. He fidgeted, practically bouncing on his heels, and pushed the idea, let's hit the library. He'd get his way, and everyone agreed to break into groups, roam, and explore, but he made them all swear they'd be careful because golems could be lurking in there. After that, they broke off into 3 groups and started roaming the library, eyes wide and curious. While Heel studied a piece of armor, Fungal lunged for a book off the shelf, only for Rian to snatch it first. Ryana cracked open the book and shouted for Hyla because it was packed with pictures. Once Hyla stared at them, she burst out that every single detail was drawn with insane precision, and Ryana nodded right along, saying the artwork was absolutely stunning. Bending over the book, he'll point out that this city might have been here long before them, because the young man had already spotted the same kind of structures on the island. Then Rihanna snaps fully upright, stares at the pages, and draws everyone's attention to the mountain right in the middle. The girl jutted her finger toward the giant mountain looming over the drawing and snapped, "That mountain looks just like our island." Rihanna stared at the mountain with a doubtful squint, muttering that it didn't match their mountain in size, while Rihanna burst out laughing, saying their island looked way more welcoming. Then he spun back and spotted a seal perched there, staring up at him. Hill and his crew closed in on Sinal, who just stopped dead, staring up at them like he'd been struck silent. And then the kid blurted out what the heck happened. Everyone snapped their heads toward where CL was staring, and there it was, a massive statue of a woman clutching a scepter in her hand. Rihanna's eyes lit up and she practically gushed that it was stunning, like it had to be a goddess. He stared at the statue in stunned silence and then explained, "Once the people who lived here worshipped this goddess, and now she's captured right here in stone." After that, they kept marching straight past the whole wall of bookshelves, right through history's shadow. Heel froze with disbelief, thinking even in his kingdom there was nothing about these ruins, so he figured they had to be the first ones to stumble onto this place. On the trip back, they stripped a couple of magic stones and heartstones from the golem's remains, then regrouped again. But even after all that, they still couldn't dig up a single scrap of info about these ruins. Valis was desperate to crack the secrets inside those books, so he hauled about a dozen of them back with him and loaded them onto CL, betting that something in there would pay off. Then he admitted straight up he wasn't even sure he'd succeed. Suddenly, the fungal thing twitched and snapped its attention to the wall. Then the girl didn't waste a word as she slammed her pickaxe into the stone. The sound gave it away. Something was hiding in the room behind that wall, so Fugel snapped to Heel and told him there was a passage back there. They scanned the area hard for any kind of passage, but nothing showed up, so Fuckle tapped her pickaxe impatiently and shot back, asking if she could start digging already. Heel himself didn't feel a single spark of magic in the air, but the light was practically screaming that the perfect spot hid behind that wall, so he pointed straight at Fula and told her where to dig, swearing that he'd guard her with his magic if anything tried to stop her. And then Fuggle Swan moved at his command. Then she hurled her whole strength into the pickaxe and crashed it into the wall. One brutal strike was all it took to smash through. Taines blurted that Fungal nailed the shot, then she smirked and strutted up to the wall hole she'd punched in. When she peered inside that secret room, she went stone still, shocked. Suddenly she bolted into that room and he followed, stopping dead in shock, until he saw what Fugel had uncovered, and then his smile lit up as he congratulated her. In that room, a tiny pedestal sat there with 3 things on top, so Follow snatched one up and cried that they were stones of change, and that at least 3 of them were right there waiting. After they tracked down that mysterious place and uncovered the stones of change, Funnel woke up every single day the moment the sun peeked over the sea rocks. Bleary-eyed, she shot upright on her bed and tried to shake the sleep out of her head. Then she climbed down from the second floor of the bed where they'd been tangled up with Rihanna right as Fool flopped out, while Rihanna kept sleeping like a baby, snoring away. Fresh off coming down, Fundle started packing and dressing in a rush. She braided her hair and then snapped her vest on over herself. The moment she was ready, Funkle shot straight down into the caves, calling Golem number 15 over her shoulder as she raced down the stairs, because no one in their community worried about digging like she did. Every single day, she marched to the mines while the others were still asleep. Then Fulxio showed up last, arriving in the morning like he couldn't miss it. He noticed, day after day, that Fulxio was already there, and the sheer amount she'd hauled up told him she'd been digging for ages. He rubbed his head, told Fundle's Gallum to get that girl out of here and take her outside, because he was scared out of his mind about how worn out she was. Once the golem clamped onto the fungal tight, her face twisted in pure disgust, because it yanked her off her work, and even then, the one healing himself didn't have a clue what the fungal was really after. After a while, they all crashed back together in the forest around the same table, and someone straight up asked, "So this stone really lets you evolve from a regular monster into something else?" Rihanna was there too, swore it was real, and said that this stone helped her evolve herself. Then the whole crew crowded around the table: Kellis, Kobolds, Map, Vols, Kamu, Elvin, Fugule, and also Lilu, Terran, and Seal. The moment Rihanna spoke, Kamu snapped his gaze to the stones in shock, because he'd always believed that was Rihanna's true face, while Feudal leaned into the captain and told him their Princess Rihanna used to be just an ordinary goblin, not some stunning beauty. The Cobalt just stared, then blurted out, "Is that really true?" And the captain got hit with surprise all over again when he heard that Rihanna was a princess, so he demanded, "Tell me, did you hear right?" With a puzzled look plastered on his face, Kamu confessed that he used to swear Rihanna was an elven princess who fled her home with Hybel. Then Rihanna and Hill nearly choked on their drinks and burst into red-faced blushing. Hill snapped, asking the captain what he meant, and the young man stammered that he'd already told him it was nothing like that at all. Then he grinned like he couldn't help himself, amused by how Rihanna and Hill reacted to his words. He clears his throat, still blushing hard, and quickly hijacks the conversation, insisting he never thought they'd stumble on 3 stones of change all at once. The young man promised they'd hand one of those stones to Fungal, who was now lounging at the table with a satisfied grin. She looked uneasy, but he pushed her worries aside, declaring that one stone was hers because she was the one who found them. After mulling it over, he snapped his eyes to Valis and promised, straight up, that the second stone would be his no matter what, and Valis, sitting there in silence, flinched hard at every word. He couldn't believe they'd spend 1 stone on him, and Valis snapped that it wasn't worth it, while he wondered if there was a better candidate out there for the role to evolve. He shot his hand out and boom, his mark lit up for everyone to see on his palm, and when they asked, he'd say he insisted on it, especially since his Wizard King mark was just sitting there doing nothing. The moment Camus heard about the Wizard King's mark Valis had, he snapped up in excitement and shouted that it was the strongest one around. Ashton nodded right away, muttering that this mark is insanely powerful and only truly shines if you know exactly how to use it. Suddenly, General Elvin snapped to attention and called for Vales, then rubbed his head like he just landed the truth, saying Vales was already old, so he should use the Stone of Change and evolve into a brand new, young body. When she heard Vales had already become something else, Fulanil gasped in terror. Asking if he was dying, Rihanna shot back, begging him not to die, and Vales said with a heavy heart that he was already too old. Alvin, Rihanna, and Feudal's words shattered his resolve, and suddenly Vales started blurting out that even in his old age, he still wants his mark to stay useful to them. With his fist clenched tight, Valis spun toward Hill, grinned, and demanded, "Let me use that stone to evolve and turn younger." So they passed out 2 stones, but a third one was still sitting there, unclaimed, because it didn't look like it was meant for anyone to evolve. The Cobalt shut the stone down cold, claiming they could keep using their marks for now, so no evolution was needed. Then Valis swung his gaze to Camus and asked straight up if he had a mark because he really wanted to see it. The captain started peeling off his glove, and as he did, he admitted he had a mark too. Then he held his hand up for everyone to see. Vols snapped in shock and he muttered that he'd never ever seen a mark like that before. Valus leaned in and told the young man this isn't just a mark. It's a sea dragon seal that lets you command the water, and he swore he'd heard only brand new Chawites can activate it. So when the young man opened his mouth, he couldn't believe it turned into a monster right before his eyes. Snapping the glove back onto his hand, he hurriedly asked them to let him explain everything, then insisted he didn't want to slap on that label, even with evolution looming. General Alvin snapped his head toward Camus, stunned that he wouldn't touch the mark, and told him based on the tag's description that Camus could be the perfect sailor. Then Alvin smirked, adding with sarcasm that Al's jokes were just plain hilarious. Camus slapped his hand to his forehead and blurted that monsters had nasty, slick scales, so he refused to turn into something like that. Heel had to awkwardly admit it was safer if he didn't push the captain to evolve. So they all agreed, no hesitation. Run both evolutions right now in the very clearing where they'd been drinking tea while Fungal marched to the center, fidgeting with impatience, and everyone else hung back at a safe distance from her. Fungal snatched up her chainstone, admitting a shaky kind of nerves, and then the girl spun toward Rihanna, who was right there, and asked what to do because Rihanna had already survived this and somehow knew exactly how. The princess snapped awake and told Fula to stop and ask himself who he truly wanted to become and to chase that dream with everything he had. Rihanna clenched her fists, rooting for Fula with all her heart, and silently begged the universe to give him luck. Rihanna's advice hit home. Funnel took a slow breath, shut her eyes, and let the stone of change guide her thoughts to exactly what she wanted and who she was about to become. And Funkle suddenly remembered one thing: she was always, non-stop, fully protected by someone, whether it was Heel, her father, or Rihanna, because no matter what, someone had her back. That girl feared the day everyone would walk away, leaving her stranded, powerless, and unable to protect herself. Then Fungal yanked the stone of change from her hands, and it flared to life as it shot up into the sky. Fundle swore she was the great Elvin's own daughter, so she refused to believe she could ever be weak or helpless. Then that stone's power detonated, roaring so hard that a savage gust of wind blasted everyone flying. When it all finally went quiet, everyone snapped their eyes open, faces packed with shock as they stared at the wreck of what had become a fubile, and the kobolds' mouths gaped while Captain Kamu muttered, stunned, "This can't be happening." He snaps his gaze away at once, slaps Map's hand over his eyes so he can't see Fugil, then breaks into a grin and tells Rihanna to handle it all. She jumps to it instantly, gripping the white dress in her hands. After she evolved, Foucault snapped her eyes open and gasped in shock, then checked herself and realized her arms and legs had stretched out and her feet were totally bare now. Fugil stared at herself in shock, then scratched the back of her head like she couldn't believe it. Turns out the stone of change really hit the mark, and now she's way taller, prettier, and her arms and legs have stretched out in full. Rihanna approached her, gently slipped a dress onto Fungal, and the princess leaned in like, "Wanna see your new self?" So they called for CA, who stretched out like a living mirror. The second Fungal caught her own reflection, her eyes snapped wide with shock. Out of nowhere, she darted over and slammed into a joyful hug with Rihanna, yelling that she'd pulled it off. She had evolved too. Rihanna hugged her back and beamed, congratulating her with a smile. Alvin stepped up to his daughter and studied her closely, arms crossed over his chest as he declared, "Everything worked out, she got bigger and faster." But when it came to strength, he couldn't promise the same, and Fuddle fired back that her focus wasn't on muscles at all, it was on magic. After insisting magic mattered most, Fundle suddenly snapped back to reality and blurted out, all fired up, asking if she could use magic right now. He'll study that Fungal up close and tell her, don't worry about magic, because he can see mana flows pulsing in her, so all she has to do is learn the spells. Fungal lit up because she finally got to use magic, and when she stared at her own hands, her skin color stayed exactly the same, unlike the princess's, and it almost made her shrug it off at first. Suddenly, she clocked it, our skin tones were wildly different, and she blurted it out to Rihanna. Fungal then got grilled about why the princess had turned so human, and the moment he started explaining, Rihanna snapped up out of nowhere, staring at him in shock. Rihanna dropped her eyes and blushed hard, mortified, then stammered that she didn't even know why it happened, only that she guessed everyone's evolution is personal. Hill rubbed his chin, lost in thought, and said it might be. After they fought through the evolution of the Fungal, Vols strode up, gripping his stone of change in his fist. He warned them that reshaping the fungal could shove him into a totally different body, and Rihanna exploded with cheers, yelling that it was his turn. Right after that, the stone erupted in bright light in Valley's hands. The moment it faded, everyone froze and stared at Valley's pure shock on their faces. Then Fonzel planted her hands on her hips and demanded, "What just happened?" When the dust finally settled, Valus stared at himself like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he went quiet for a beat and finally muttered that something was terribly wrong because nothing at all had happened to him. Valus reached out and touched himself again just to confirm nothing had shifted for real, and Camus just stared at him, baffled, demanding to know why it all ended the same. And then Val jolted like someone yanked his strings. He went stone still, his whole body trembling until his grip failed and his cane clattered to the floor. Everyone gasped in shock and bombarded him with, "What just happened?"